Hi, I'm Dante,
And I'm Tommy.
and you're listening to Twigging Onto Twig, a podcast where we talk about Wildbow's most cutting-edge, crime-riddled web serial, Twig.
In today's episode, we discuss 3.10 and Enemy Arc 3, as well as Boil 1 and Boil 2.
Didn't we already do Boil 1 and Boil 2?
We're doing it again and better. But no, not really. If you want to go listen to our thoughts about Boil, we did an episode about that, and that has been released. It's just important to note that it's relevant. Again,
I think it's actually kind of worth noting that it isn't really necessary
it's not.
because, like, the first time I read this, I'd never even heard of Boyle, and the fact that we happened to read Boyle before doing this was an interesting new perspective, and we're going to talk about that a lot. So if you care about that, go listen to our episode on Boyle if you haven't already.
Or go
Otherwise,
read Boil.
Yeah, do all the things. You know what to do. All right, so here's the audiobook descriptions for these two chapters. 3.10, this is one of those chapters where Wildbow hints at what the world of Twig is really like beyond the lambs. I'm still trying to pinpoint what the recent war in this world is I'm still trying to pinpoint what the recent war in this world is an analog for in ours. We also get a small hint of the theory behind Wyvern that makes the drug work, for some definition of work, as well as a hint of what was left over after the war. All in all, quite the chapter for hints.
And clues.
Stay tuned for the next chapter, in which another enemy enters the fray.
Enjoy a slice of life from your typical Radham resident. That is, the story of an innocent person in a completely awful situation that came about through no fault of their own. As with most Enemy chapters, the following content is somewhat more PG-13 than the rest. This episode is brought to you by Lauren Sherman, and it concludes Arc 3, Lips Sealed. Anything you want to say about those summaries?
I liked the enter the fray pun.
I did not catch that, but yes.
Also worth noting that Lauren Sherman is the guest who did the previous two interludes.
Okay.
Does a good job as always, and yeah, they were excellent chapters on the audiobook. Jamie being injured and kind of whimpering out whatever he said was
sounds sad,
about as heartbreaking as it ought to have been. So yes.
Mm-hmm. I am interested in. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a little bit, I guess, spoilery, not for Pale itself. Well, a little bit for Pale, but also for the retrospective essays that Wildbow wrote. It's interesting that we get here Enemy, Genevieve Frey, who is the protagonist of Boil, and at some point, theoretically, was the protagonist of what would have been Twig in a different world. And it's just in the those retrospectives of Pale, Wildbow mentions that one of the people who eventually becomes Charles was originally one of the protagonists, one of the characters that evolves to become Charles is. So it's interesting that we play with this. And I mean, I don't know whether Genevieve is going to remain an antagonist or an enemy or whatnot, but I just pointing out that there's that thing that we've seen her as the protagonist of her own story already.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know of very many authors who share their previous drafts of their stories. Admittedly, no. I don't know of many other web serial authors' works very well.
Or other authors in general.
Sure. But like the amount of information that Wildbow shares about his thought process and like
the writing process and the
writing process, you know, and he's talked about, like you said, the possible protagonists for Pale. He's mentioned a few protagonists in the Parahumans universe.
Yeah, I mean, the original draft, if I remember correctly, and maybe I'm conflating two things, but was Guts and Glory, which was set in Ottawa once upon a time.
The first one was set in Ottawa. I think it was previous to Guts and Glory.
Potentially.
Yeah, but yeah. Like, you know, you have Amy, Victoria, Aegis, all these other characters who end up in the story taking their turn as possible protagonists.
hmm I mean,
Um,
isn't there? I mean, worm spoilers, but and I don't know if this is fanon or like actual something that he said, but the that there was a possibility for Skitter to die in the Leviathan arc, and for another character to become protagonist of Worm. And I don't know if that's just something that's been
yeah, he's
accepted
mentioned
as.
that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I wasn't sure if that was like actual something he'd said or if it'd been like extrapolated. But yeah, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I kind of imagine that all authors, or at least all authors in these types of big epic stories, would go through a few phases of seeing which perspective is the best one to tell the story from. And just Wildbow has been the most
Open about it.
transparent about specifics out of the authors that we've paid attention to.
Somewhere out there in the multiverse, there's a version of Lord of the Rings where Pippin is the point of view character and just
See,
drifts along through the entire thing without understanding what's going on.
the thing is that Tolkien's drafts are all
Oh, I know.
published.
I was being facetious.
I
Yes, I know. There's.
don't think I have that particular volume, though, sadly.
Oh, that's a shame. But yeah, no, I know Tolkien has. I mean, so much of the Legendarium is Tolkien's random notes and drafts that have been assembled by his estate and published as books.
Yes. Yeah, the only ones in the Legendarium that he actually completed and published were The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. Everything else is nebulously canon.
Yes. And it's so fun being able to read through the old drafts and see where it came from. And
Yeah, I mean, I remember noticing at some point, turning this into delving into Tolkien or whatever. Um, so the well, like
always happy to delve into Tolkien.
one of the oldest drafts talking about Numenor has them as like a super high tech civilization with flying ships and all that, and that does not exist in the versions that we have gotten.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I mean, technically, there is a flying ship.
Sure, but it's not like the Numenorians aren't roaming around the galaxy in Star Destroyers. It's
Yes, as funny as that would be.
yeah, and I mean, it's one of the things about Tolkien that it feels like a lot of good authors, he can't really like contain himself when he says good ideas and stuff. Like I don't know if you've read, I'm sure you have, but the Father Christmas letters,
Yes.
which are just letters that he wrote to his kids, ostensibly from Santa Claus, and he just can't help himself but develop this complex cosmology and world and like
Hmm.
mythos, like from Santa Claus sending letters. There's like wars with goblins and
Yes.
yeah,
And Santa's elves have as much of a history and lore
yep,
to them as any of his other elves.
exactly, yeah,
Their own writing system that he's developed for them, and oh,
yeah,
it's delightful.
it is. There's such a good. That's it's a good book. We have a copy
Mhm.
somewhere around here. Oh, yep, I can see it. The Father Christmas letters, right down there.
Yep,
Look
I've
forward
got a
to
copy as well.
Sam being old enough to appreciate those things.
You'll have to write him Father Christmas letters of your own.
Yeah. Though we'll see if we use Santa Claus or Father Christmas. But my family's tradition, I don't know why or where this comes from. I think it's more of an Eastern European thing coming from my Hungarian grandparents or grandmother. But it's the angels that come at midnight on Christmas and bring the Christmas tree and the presents. So we'll see what the traditions are that we develop
Sure,
with Sam.
sure. Yeah, you've got a whole uh, multicultural plethora of options to choose from.
Yeah. Anyway, getting back to Twig.
Yeah, Tolkien is an easy tangent to go down
Yep,
forever.
absolutely.
All right. So, in terms of housekeeping and announcements, we need to shout out our good friends Vice Versa and Kifos, who have started a podcast about Claw.
It's clawful evil, probable claws. Bum bum bum.
Bum bum bum. Yeah, it is excellent and delightful.
I
And
have not yet listened to it, and I really need to. Well, I need to catch up on Claw first, and then listen to the podcast, which is on my list of things to do in the coming weeks.
excellent.
I am
I
still.
was a little bit behind, but when they started releasing, I made a point of catching up pretty fast.
Yeah, no, I have the last chapter of arc 1 to finish, and then all of arc 2.
Perfect.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to them at
Yeah, no,
that
they're a
point.
lot of fun. They've got a lot of good insights, and yeah,
Yep,
Claw is a really fun story for them to tackle as well, and it's coming out live, which is always fun. So yeah, definitely, if you're not listening to them, you should be. What's wrong with you? Go and subscribe to them and give them all of the love.
absolutely.
Also, you may have noticed that when I introduced the podcast, I said Wildbow's most cutting edge crime riddled web serial
I
Twig.
did. I was going to leave that unspoken reference.
That yeah, that was ripped off from them.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
that
Sure.
was ripped off from them. Their first episode refers to Claw as Wildbow's most cutting edge crime riddled web serial.
Gotcha. All right. So,
Explaining the joke here, as
yep,
we do.
making it as funny as possible.
Yes.
All right. So, general thoughts. We kind of already talked about this. Just that Boyle, we've read Boyle, and we can sort of assume that the broad strokes of Boyle happened in Twig on some form or another. The details are likely fairly different, but Genevieve Frey runs away from the academy, manages to steal ahead, and decides to become a private investigator. I assume she also meets what's his face Linus and promises him to fix his face and his teeth and all that.
Yeah, I mean, the broad
Just because
strokes are there, so
I assume Linus is a broad stroke.
yeah, I guess we'll see.
Maybe his name is Leonard or something.
Maybe his name is Professor Hale.
Definitely.
Maybe
Um,
he's Cecil.
no, but I mean, yeah.
Anyway, I
Uh,
don't know. It's hard to speculate about that because it
of course.
literally could be nothing and it could be everything. And
Absolutely. I liked Linus as a character in theory, and
uh
I'd like to. It seems like he would have been a recurring character, and I was hoping to see more of him, just
sure,
because we don't really see someone who exists as a victim of the system, as a character that's like. I mean, that's not exactly correct because all of our protagonists are victims of the system, but they're also part of the system.
right.
All the lambs are absolutely victims, but they're also currently at least participating in the system in some form or another.
hmm
Whereas Linus was explicitly a victim of someone abusing and using. It was like a someone who's trapped in a payday loan cycle, and that would have been interesting to see. So I hope we do see some more like that.
Yes. Well, we'll see. The other thing I kind of want to touch upon before we get into the plot itself was that this is the end of Arc 3,
Yep.
Lips Sealed. So, do you have any further thoughts on the chapter name beyond what
Um,
we talked about previously?
just the fact, really, that we don't know really much still about Sub Rosa. Like, she went to her grave without really giving us any answers. And I think that's reflected in that title.
hmm Honestly, that was also kind of the only thing that came to mind for me was the fact
Right.
that she went to her death with a lot of her stories left untold.
And I'm assuming that, like, we're not going to get much more. She doesn't exist, and, like, it doesn't seem like she existed as part of a greater conspiracy. She was a victim of Shipman, you know, doing her own thing previously that was potentially not good, but still a victim of Shipman, and she's gone. And everything
hmm
that happened with her, she took Shipman with her, and we're not going to learn more about what's happening. We can learn, we're potentially going to learn more about her goals, but like her motivation, not necessarily.
Yeah. Or even maybe we won't.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Just, you know,
Just though that's the seal. Next arc is called, let me
you
just
had
double
it there.
check.
It's like I noticed you
Stitch in
wrote it.
Time.
Yeah, which to me is just, if I had to guess, it's been a million years since I've read A Wrinkle in Time, but it sounds like a reference to that. So
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll save our speculating for when we start that.
I'll make sure to read
Um,
A Wrinkle in Time ahead of time so I can expertly deduce what Arc 4 will be about.
yes, very smart. Because the plots will be completely parallel, as
Absolutely.
as always. Speaking of plots, let's do our plot summary.
So previously on Twig, Sub Rosa injured Jamie, leaving him in the staircase in a bad condition. Sai used Gladys Shipman to lure Sub Rosa up the stairs, and then Helen knocked her off the staircase in some dramatic plunge. Sub Rosa plummeted to her death and was devoured by Gorger.
Yes. And also, we have a previously on Boyle. You kind of summarized it already, but I'm going to read this again anyway.
Okay.
Genevieve Frey, was working on a project to embed bone syringes in her fingertips, and the professors were unimpressed and failed her out of the academy. Rather than escorting her off the premises, they imprisoned her in a cell overnight for processing. Frey used some concealed biotech, namely
Swallowed monster.
her pet monster Dolores, to escape, and also takes with her a fellow prisoner who is a disembodied head named Will. Frey and Will take shelter in a stitched brothel, namely, we were talking about Linus, that's his brothel.
Point of order, the distinction there in Boyle is not a stitched brothel; they're clones.
Oh, they weren't stitched? I didn't remember.
No, they were what they call them centuples. But
Okay,
there were more than. But yeah, it was like a bio horror brothel.
yes. So Frey and Will took shelter in Linus's brothel, which was sendables and not stitched.
Yep.
Uh, Shelter in exchange for her medical assistance, and they decided to take action against the university, with Frey proposing that Will become a PI to gather intel.
In Lips Sealed 3.10. Well, actually, I want to note also there, part of the incentive there was that Frey promised Will a body since he is only a head.
Okay, yeah, that's important
It is
to what
it,
happens next.
it is important just because we know that Warren has a body.
Yes.
Lips Sealed 3.10. Sai makes sure Helen is okay, then runs down to check on Jamie. Jamie is tended to by Academy doctors. Because of the extent of his injuries, they perform invasive surgery on him right there in the stairwell. The Lambs take turn keeping watch over Jamie until the bowels are unsealed the following day. After they leave the bowels, they are met by Hale and Briggs, who have two important things to tell them. One, the Academy is being restructured due to this and other recent incidents. And two, the Lambs are being sent on a mission to eliminate a new threat, an enemy of the Academy, one Genevieve Frey. Genevieve or Genevieve?
We'll get into that. But yeah, probably Genevieve. In Lip Seal 3.x enemy, we get a bit of a
Flashback.
what's the flashback? That's the word. Bit of a flashback. Warren, who is a character that we've never heard of before, and his friend Henry, who we've also never heard of before. Pardon?
Harrison. Oh, it's Henry and Harry in the in Boyle.
So yeah, Warren and his friend Henry arrive at the home of Warren's father after several years studying elsewhere. Warren's father takes offense at Warren having gotten eye replacement surgery and disowns him. So Warren goes to live in Radham with Henry and takes his father's stitched Wendy with him at his mother's insistence. Henry takes advantage of Warren and kidnaps him and sells him to a mad scientist, who severs his head from his body and incorporates him into a thinking machine with several other heads. Several months pass, and the mad scientist is discovered by the Academy and arrested. Warren's head is brought to a guard station, where he meets Genevieve Frey, who is being imprisoned until she has been made to forget what she learned at the Academy. Genevieve escapes using some concealed biotech, namely her hidden monster,
Dolores.
which we assume is Dolores, and offers to take Warren and Wendy with her. After a time skip, we see Genevieve and Warren having a new massively strong body, on the run from the Academy. But they watch as the Lambs get off the train on their trail, and Genevieve is pleased to see them.
That is exciting. I'm looking forward to the next arc.
Dum dum dum.
Always dun dun dun.
Oh, here.
I like that.
I made a sound effect. It's not the greatest sound effect, but
It's fun.
it's mine and I like it.
Yeah, so getting into the plot here, as you pointed out in the notes here, it's important to note that Boyle is not explicitly canon, and that Twig Frey and Boyle Frey are not necessarily the same person. I think it's clear that we've learned that, or we the way we see the both of them is very different, and the academy or university or whatever it is, there's a lot of differences. But I think it's safe to assume that the broad strokes are fairly similar in terms of what happens post academy for Frey.
Yeah, it's clear that he liked where that story thread was going and
Yeah,
incorporated it pretty much wholesale with only some minor tweaks to
yeah,
make it fit.
yeah.
One of the biggest tweaks that I noticed, I didn't reread Boyle. I don't remember if I said that, but you did, so
I did.
you would know more of the details of difference. But the biggest difference I think that I noticed was that Warren was named Will in Boyle, and his
Yeah,
name is now Warren. Um, I think that previously the whole Wyvern formula angle was not present
I don't think it was mentioned
in
at all.
Boyle.
For Frey, the biggest reason I difference is, or sorry, the biggest difference I noticed is Frey's reason for leaving the academy or for running away. In uh, Boyle, Genevieve sort of fails out of the academy in her third year, what I think it was. But
Yeah, she
she's
wasn't on the professorship
no,
track.
exactly. Whereas here, they're like, oh, she was a great student and she was basically a professor. She was ready to be there. And then we found out that she was abusing whatever made Psy.
The
Um,
Wyvern formula.
exactly. And tried to stop her and she ran away. So, clearly, that's obviously a pretty big difference in terms of her relationship with the academy and presumably her perspective on the academy itself.
She was a lot more invested in the academy now than she was when we got to know her
Yeah.
reading Boyle.
And another thing I noticed also is that Will in Boyle refers to the Stitched as Stitched and is corrected away from that terminology by Genevieve, who refers to them as like voltaic men or whatever. And I guess Wildbow liked Stitched as a term enough that he's like, no, actually, that's going to be the word.
Oh, interesting. So I guess he made some decisions about terminology he wanted to use in the meantime and
Hmm.
moved from voltaic to, I mean, I think we saw the word voltaic a
I think we
couple of
might have.
times.
Did we or did we see Ambaric, or is that just me? Like,
No, Embark is his Dark Materials,
it is, but it's one of
I
the
think.
the other like steampunky words
Yeah,
for
yeah,
electricity, which both of them incidentally come from amber.
yes.
I think we've talked
Um,
about that, haven't we?
I think we talked about that in the episode where we talked about Boyle.
Potentially, yeah. And the other thing I kind of mentioned this already, but one of the other things I wanted to mention is that I don't think we've seen any examples of the centuplets, as in the like cloned people. I feel like the Stitched have kind of taken that role more in Twig
Yeah.
than
Well, I mean, I think Mary and her gang were the only
yeah.
clones that we've seen.
Whereas in Boyle, the like general brute labor and prostitution, and all that are done by these clones, by the centuplets.
Mm.
Whereas here, they're very
Yeah, it's
much
all stitched
it's all
here.
Stitch doing everything.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
Because, like, because we have Mary, you'd think that there would be more clones, but I
yeah,
guess with the Stitch being so cheap,
yeah.
it's just not viable for most
And actually,
circumstances.
speaking of Stitched, I've said multiple things are like, oh, this is the biggest difference. But I actually think this is the biggest difference is the existence of Wendy.
Okay, yes.
She does not exist in Boyle, and she is there uh in Twig. The
Yes.
stitched the stitched girl or stitched
Hmm.
woman who is caring for Warren.
Yeah, I liked the way Warren put it, like the head without a body and the body missing most of its
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was Wendy in that last part of the
She was.
chapter?
She crushes
Okay,
a
she
whelp, I
is
think.
okay. So she is still with them.
She is still around. She's still
So I like her.
yeah, and we're going to talk much more about her, I think. But it was just she was a very different perspective on Stitch than we've seen before.
Yeah, definitely. Um, while we're on the topic of Boyle, what was your reaction when you saw that Genevieve was back in the story?
It was like, wait, that's a familiar name. Why is that a familiar name? Have we read her? We've like talked about her before. Oh wait, yes, we absolutely have in a completely different story. Yeah. What was yours? How did you? Where did you? When did you make that connection?
Yeah, so I made the connection when I started reading Boyle. because if you recall,
Oh,
I've read
okay.
Twig
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
before, past this point.
Yeah.
So I knew that Genevieve was a character in Twig. And so when we were reading Boyle, I was like, oh, cool. It's
This is familiar.
this is one of the other characters being, but of course I had to keep that secret from you
Of
and
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
avoid
I
mentioning
appreciate.
her this entire time. Um,
How did it impact your original reading of Boyle? Since we did that before we dived into Twig together,
um,
like that was our practice episode.
yes. I think it's kind of hard to say because having not read Boyle without that knowledge, it's hard to compare. I will say that when I read this part of Twig the first time,
Hmm.
I saw I was seeing Genevieve as the enemy, like Percy was, like
And Mauer
Mauer
is, yeah,
was, right? Yet another one of these bad guys who, even though the Academy is bad, the enemies are also pretty bad,
right.
and she was just another enemy. Whereas in Boyle, we kind of came to like her a lot and see her as the protagonist, and we were rooting for her. So now we see her again, and I'm very much inclined to be on her side.
Exactly. I'm absolutely very sympathetic to her without knowing anything of who she actually is in this incarnation. Like
Hmm.
I've coming into it with the Boyle knowledge, I'm already
Hmm.
like, oh, she is a protagonist and she is going to, at some point they're all going to be working on side together to make things better.
And part of me is wondering, like, if Wildbow is kind of intending us not to see Genevieve as like the good guy right away necessarily, and that either he'll reveal it later or he'll confirm that she's actually yet another bad enemy.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
like he's writing this with the kind of assumption that we don't know already her
right.
intentions and her.
She she has to be to the general audience. She's a new character. She's not someone that,
Yeah, exactly.
we read
So,
Boyle honestly only because we were practicing and getting ready for
yeah.
this. Like this is a warm up episode, Otherwise, I don't know what like this would have been out of the blue and not someone that we knew.
Hmm. Hmm. So I'm just kind of vaguely wondering if we've put ourselves at a bit of a disadvantage in
Yeah.
already knowing this character and
Well,
feeling positively about her
and she
before
might,
Wildbow introduced her in the story.
and yeah, again, like she might not be at all the same character.
Yeah, she might turn out to be like the most evil
Yeah, exactly.
of them all.
Yeah,
So anyway, also when I decided to split the three chapters,
that was why.
this was why it was
It made
Genevieve
sense.
being
Yeah,
revealed at the end of it.
because we talked a lot previous arc, and I feel like the this would have do- dominated and obscured the ending of Sub Rosa, and I feel like that deserved its own.
Hmm.
Because Sub Rosa's not really a thing. Like I think you pointed out in our notes somewhere. I think might have already talked about it, but like
I think I put
she's
it
gone
way down under when we would talk about Sub Rosa specifically.
potentially,
But
but yeah, like she's
it's like
gone.
there's still all this mystery about Sub Rosa, and that was a pretty big thing that just happened. I mean, Jamie was severely injured. Helen did that
Yep.
whole epic thing. Sai nearly died. Like it was a big thing, but then she gets eaten, and everyone's on to the next thing. And now they're after Frey,
Yeah,
and nobody gives her a second thought.
which is honestly pretty sad for her.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
from what I understand, she was kind of an asshole, but
I mean
there
they're
were hints. There were hints that she would be.
character depth.
Yeah,
No, absolutely. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
So we probably should talk about some of the stuff that happens before Genevieve is mentioned.
yeah,
The whole thing with Jamie's injury and recovery. There's not really a lot of plot movement there. It's mostly just character work. So I
absolutely.
feel
We'll
like we
talk
could talk
about
about
that.
that later.
Yep,
But the announcement that Briggs makes is pretty significant.
absolutely. That's pretty big. That there have been 3 strikes, and he is being replaced because there's been a vote of no confidence by the crown and whatever to replace him. And the academy is essentially being nationalized, if you can call the royalty assuming direct control of an institution nationalizing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because Briggs says that he is being replaced and the person taking his place is a duke.
Who is 16th in line for the throne or something
Yes.
like that?
But I didn't really see that as meaning the academy is being nationalized so much as just like the oversight of it. I mean, maybe it
Well,
amounts to the same thing,
I think it
but it's
does
more like
because
the crown is like I want to have better eyes on this institution that we rely
yeah,
on.
but it goes from, someone who is a scientist, from the academy itself running itself, to someone who is a representative of the crown running the academy.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot deeper of a connection between
Yeah,
the
it
academy and the
changes.
crown
Like,
now.
in theory, or at least as I understand it, the academy's independence is done, if there is
Yes,
independence. But
yes, it's like I feel like it's not like officially being absorbed into the crown, which is what I would kind of consider nationalizing it.
potentially,
But it's certainly a step in that direction.
'cause, I mean, presumably this Duke is not an academy scientist. He's
Yeah, well, I believe they say that he's 16th in line for the crown and
yeah,
has led armies in war.
exactly.
So
So
yes,
I mean, he's probably not this like stereotypical foppish uh, aristocrat, but he's also not Briggs or Hale or
hmm
uh, Ibit or whatever.
yes, yeah. Well,
This can
I
only
think.
mean good
Oh,
things
go
for the ethics of the academy, right?
ahead. Well, the fact that they're refurbishing the bowels is kind of a good thing for the ethics of the academy, but
No, they're making them dingier and darker and
it's
more
spookier.
labyrinthine.
Yes. One thing that I think is funny is because when I started reading Twig, I assumed that the academies were an offshoot of the Crown. And it's only been kind of through reading it more closely that I kind of picked up on all of the hints that no, it's separate and
It's its
like
own institution.
each like even though they kind of are subjects of the crown and work towards the same goals regarding the war and so forth, they are independent entities, and now that we've come to that realization, now they're being reintegrated again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Um,
anyway, there's certainly a lot of potential there.
hmm
One thing that I thought was, as you mentioned, Briggs said that this was the third strike,
Yeah,
and I was vaguely wondering if the three strikes were the three arcs we've had so far, namely Percy, Mauer, and Sabrosa.
I that makes sense.
It kind of does, but at the same time, like Percy was, if we recall, not at Radham, so I think maybe like
Sure,
this might be referring to three different things. And I mean,
but
ultimately, it doesn't matter, but
ultimately it doesn't. But Mothmont is nominally under like the jurisdiction, as is all of Radom, and
yeah.
like the academy is meant to be policing this area. I mean, that's the
hmm
point of like the Gorgers and Catcher and Dog
But I
and
also kind of got the impression that these were things that happened all the time.
that
Like,
is true. Yeah, I mean, it's like there's nothing special to Sai
hmm
about being sent to Mothmont or
yeah,
whatever. Just like,
like,
okay, this is the next mission, and then this is the next mission, and then this
yeah.
is the next
And
one.
so Percy was just like the umpteenth of
Yeah,
mission in a row, and it just happened to be the first of this story because that's where Mary joins
yeah.
up.
Well, because previously there was the snake catcher. We could have had an
hmm
entire arc about tracking down the snake catcher, and then before that you had, I don't know,
hmm
like the dancing hangman or whatever, who's doing horrible things to
Yeah.
people, and then
And
before that
Sabrosa
there's like the
was. Sorry,
plague
go ahead.
doctor, or I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, there's all kinds of, yeah. Sai's the way Sai talks, or the way the lambs talk about Percy does not make it seem like he's like, oh, this is something new and big that's changed the paradigm.
hmm And Sub Rosa was the first villain arc that was purely internal.
Yeah,
So I'm kind of thinking that this might be the third strike inside the academy itself,
yeah. Though Mauer
which
is
is kind of a
sort of,
fascinating story too.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I guess
you're right, Mauer too, because he had that inside
whatever the
hook
frat
with
bro,
Whiskers.
yeah.
So I'm kind of willing to say that Whiskers is probably strike two.
Yeah. Don't know what strike one is. I
Don't know what
agree.
strike one is. Maybe it was the snake charmer.
Maybe.
Anyway, um, yeah. So a lot of changes happening, and how much that will change what the lambs do and how they relate to the academy remains to be seen. But it will certainly be interesting. Uh,
I'm just
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I don't. I guess I don't have anything to say there. I'm trying to think like about this process and just maybe because the fact that Mothmont is a feeder school to the academy and it's like potential academy students who were replaced by the clones, but they caught it before it became a random problem. So I don't know. Yeah, you're probably right that it must be something else that was
Hmm.
the problem.
And honestly, it's such a minor detail that we'll probably never get confirmation either
Yeah,
way.
you're probably right.
Unfortunately, oh well. One thing interesting that Briggs says is that the sentiment across the Crown States is that there is something brewing. And like
Yep.
as we mentioned, these things are kind of happening all the time. So there's always something brewing. But we've seen Percy being approached by and absorbed
Yeah.
into some sort of secret society. Um,
And I mean, generally speaking, we've, or at least I have assumed, or I've talked about, I think I think it's the crown trying to consolidate order by like fomenting dissent and being able to crack down,
yes. So the sentiment across the Crown States is that there's something brewing, but that something is the Crown
brewing it.
brewing
Yes.
it. Yes.
But it just because I think what we've seen here with the Duke is the Duke taking over is the crown play or I'm sure there's a lot more coming to it, but the crown sort of getting its fingers and taking over what could have been a potential rival to
Hmm.
the authority, the academy's night, the academy's having power that is outside of the crown's authority, and by removing Briggs and putting this Duke in charge, it's subsuming that authority into the crown.
Hmm. So here's a question for you. What probability do you think Genevieve is involved in this Crown plot of something brewing?
I don't know if she is yet, but I mean, if we take Boyle, where she's becoming a private investigator, I'd like to assume that she's picked up on something because we know she's a protagonist of this story still.
And do you
And
think that she's affiliated herself with it?
I don't know. I kind of feel like there's a chance in that who else would really be able to provide her the resources to build Warren a body?
Sure.
But I don't know. I don't know. I don't even really have anything like concrete towards Genevieve or even this. This is a theory, not like anything else. It just feels right as a theory.
That's true. And to be fair, we haven't really seen that much
That
of her
or the conspiracy or
or any of that.
yeah.
It's very, very much a trickle,
Hmm.
despite being 3 arcs in.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow, we're only 3 arcs in. That's wild.
remember when we were going to do like an episode every 2 weeks and then we'd be
Yeah,
done in like a few
16
years?
years.
All right. So now we've
Yeah.
got the new mission. The lambs need to go and stop Genevieve.
I want to point out that Genevieve knows who and what the lambs are. She's very intimately familiar with all of the projects that have been sent after her, which is
Yes,
fascinating because, as we saw, most of the other scientists and professors are not. In
that's
the last
true.
arc, or in arc 3, they're interrogating all these people who have no idea who they are. But I guess it makes sense that she knows who the lambs are, at least if she's taking Wyvern, because that means that she would have been involved on some level with Psy.
I think maybe that's possible, but I also feel like the way Hale describes it, it seems like a bunch of students are taking small doses of
True.
Wyvern as a performance drug. And the idea that all of them would be familiar with the lambs,
Wrong.
ludicrous.
Yeah. So it's a mystery how she's familiar with. She's like, oh, that's a whelp, obviously. Oh, they've been sending dog and catcher after us, and we've been
Hmm.
escaping them. Oh, these are the lambs. Great, we're gonna like deal with them. Because I mean, I feel like a good portion of Percy's enemy interlude was how it was impossible to escape, or not impossible, very hard to escape dog and catcher.
Hmm.
And she's been doing it for however long while trailing a stitched and a head on a body.
Well, she does have a lot of wyvern formula, so that gives her an edge. I feel like Sylvester would.
Not only that, she knows how to make wyvern.
Yes, interesting. That's true.
Yeah. Oh, I'm fascinated to learn more.
Yes, absolutely. Um, I feel like we should talk about a lot of the stuff that happens in the interlude itself, which is
Sure.
Warren's journey from, um, you know, laid back student to monster with a recycled head.
Yeah, sure.
But ultimately, all of it is just kind of like he went from shitty situation to shitty situation to shitty situation,
Yeah.
and that just kind of put him in a position where he was like, "Yep, absolutely, sign me up. Let's go kick some
Whatever
ass."
gets me out of this
Yeah,
headlessness thing.
yeah. And I kind of don't really think that, his family situation will come up again. I don't think his dad
I don't
will come back. I don't think we'll see Henry again, or the
no.
mad scientist, or the
I don't
thought
think
machine.
I don't think they matter to the narrative. They just exist to get Warren to this point.
Hmm. So, but it was beautifully written. It was
Oh yeah.
deeply unsettling as usual, for an interlude. It was.
I really appreciate it. Felt like the writing as Warren loses his grip on his own sanity, the writing gets to be more and more disjointed. I
Mhm.
felt like it was a reflection of his state of being and his perspective.
Yes, and I think it really did show
Hmm.
like the disconnect and in the
Almost,
writing as well.
almost incoherence, right? Like at a
Yes.
point.
Hmm. Also, I really liked, and Wildbow does this all the time.
Hmm.
Um, how like he gets several paragraphs into being a disembodied head before revealing
That he's ahead.
that he is a disembodied head,
Yeah. It's like
which is.
something is wrong. Because my
Hmm.
first instinct reading that is like, oh, we're learning what it's like to be a stitched. Like the consciousness is
Sure.
trapped
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
With especially with the foreshadowing of Wendy showing a bit more agency than we've seen from Stitch. I was kind
Hmm.
of assuming that's where we were
I
going
think
with
we've
that.
seen, like more explicit references to the idea that Stitched have a bit of
Yeah.
consciousness remaining, or seem to.
Yeah. Definitely. And I
Um,
thought that's what we were seeing. Like I thought that was being made explicit more so than Wendy also made explicit in this arc.
yes, yes. So yeah, it was really interesting. I don't think it'll really, come like continue to like. I don't think most of his adventures will be that relevant, but they were certainly really great read.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Also, I kind of want to draw a bit of a parallel to a certain thing that happens in Claw, but I'm not going to because you haven't read that far yet. I don't think.
No, probably not. Um,
But when you do, maybe you'll pick up on it.
sure.
And hopefully, people listening to this who have read Claw will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm planning on reading it this week. I don't know why I've been putting it off
Hmm. Hmm.
because I
Um,
was enjoying reading it. It's not like I wasn't enjoying reading it. I was enjoying it very much.
well, the reading list piles up
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
it always does. Um, yeah. So anyway, we end up with Warren with his new body, giant, giant body, and,
Hmm.
Wendy and Genevieve on the run.
Well, not
And
quite on the run since they're like, all right, the lambs are here. We're gonna make a stand.
yes, we'll stick around for a while.
Yeah.
So she's excited, which is fun.
And I wonder if it has anything to do with Sai's last line in the arc.
I was just going to say that. The
Like,
idea
if
that Sai and Genevieve know that each other are wyverns
yeah, if there's
and are
reciprocity there.
excited about each other.
And like I can see it even like in antagonistic excitement. Like, ooh, someone on my level.
Hmm.
Like I've been dealing with these schmucks for so long.
That's
I
true.
now with someone I can
Yeah.
like I'm
Well,
happy to talk
like
and yeah, like
like Sai's, impression of Mauer.
exactly. And I
Yes.
think that's that might have been foreshadowing of this, where Sai is excited to have a peer, and it's someone, he was disappointed that Mauer did not see him as a peer.
Hmm.
And here he has someone who likely will, because she knows exactly what he is.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, very exciting, very fun. Um, yeah, maybe we should
Move on.
move on so that you can read the next chapter sooner.
Yep. So moving on to general world building.
I thought it was interesting um, how much in the interlude, the enemy interlude, we saw a lot of perspectives of people outside of the academy. You know, we
Yeah,
have Warren's dad, we have the people in Pontiac where Warren was studying, and kind of a lot of like, this is not directly under the academy. We're kind of a little bit removed, and
yeah.
there's more sentiment of um,
This is horrible. Things are
resistance
changing
and
badly, and
dislike. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And especially Warren's dad's whole attitude of like how all of this stuff is just kind of ruining everything. And
I mean, it makes me think a lot of the Warren's dad's attitude is like that of a Luddite, and we use Luddite
mhm,
now as like a bad word. Oh, someone who hates technology and all that. But the Luddites originally were a labor movement who were destroying technology because the new the mills and all that, because they were automating away their way of life, their like livelihood. They weren't intrinsically necessarily hating technology. They were upset that their their livelihood was being replaced by automation, essentially.
mhm.
And I get that vibe also from Warren's father, who is buying into it.
People are not happy about the way the academy are doing things, and
Yeah,
this is seems to be much more overt outside of the academy towns.
right. Because like so far from what we've seen, it just like everybody's either part of the system or trod down to be part of the system.
Yeah,
More or less. Maurer was kind of fighting with from the system, but it still felt like he was operating from a point of view where it's like this is the way things are.
yeah.
Whereas whatever his name is, Clifford, Warren's father, it's like, oh, this is all this newfangled technology that's terrible and ruining society.
Yep. Uh, so yeah, I've just kind of felt that was interesting perspective,
Absolutely,
and
I agree.
if we see more outside of the academy, like in the town that they're at currently,
Yeah,
that's not an academy town. I wonder if there will be a big sentiment of anti-academy,
yeah. I think there's a difference.
or just like just the fact that they're not directly uh, what's the word, oppressed by the academy might make them more overtly antagonistic towards anything academy related.
Potentially, 'cause I mean, I feel like where they are now is like implied to be a smallish town, right?
Yes,
Like, and that generally has that feeling of more provincialness,
provinciality.
sure, whatever that means. Which,
Sure. Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Um,
Speaking of which, let's get into our locations.
sure.
Starting with Radom, because that's where we start out. And the thing we learn about Radom is that they're putting stuff in the water supply that will cause people to die if they leave town.
Naturally, isn't that how you do keep people on in place?
I mean, probably it's the easiest way,
How
most
do you do
effective.
it?
Mostly, I post snipers at the town boundaries.
Yes, but then the snipers can leave.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I think Radom might be onto something here.
clearly. But yeah,
Honestly, I think this might be the most dystopian thing we've seen them do.
I yeah, absolutely. Like you
Like
guys
they've done
are
a lot, but this is another level.
you are our test subjects because you happen to live here, and you can't even leave to not be our test subjects because you will die.
Yeah. But like I don't even think it is for test subjects because like they get their test subjects and even then they feel bad about taking them if they're not like
Yeah,
prisoners or whatever.
yeah. But it's like
But
creating a
it's
captive
like even
population.
even if you're not here for us to experiment on, we don't want you going elsewhere.
You might have picked up something Academy related, and bringing it to someone else ruins our
Hmm.
competition. Or that, honestly, is one of the things that has felt the most biopunky.
Yes.
like
like the
the mega corporation having something in the water so that its employees cannot quit and move to a different company.
yes,
Um,
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Um, very very sinister, very cool idea, but yeah,
yeah,
definitely takes it up another level. I think
definitely.
between this and Warren being sold off to a scientist to be
Well, that wasn't the
disembodied.
academy. That was his friend.
Yes, that was a, a independent
Back alley
back alley scientist, but yeah, I think we've gone up a level of we've upped the stakes a bit in
of
these
horror.
chapters of horror with these
Hmm.
two particular bits of biotech.
No, absolutely.
And yeah, if they can do this, like we're only on arc 3, and
How do we escalate
they've
from here?
escalated to this. Like one shudders to think what else is in store.
Well, there is the Chekhov's gun that we have been priming or this arc. As in,
You mean the Academy monster?
that's right. Because
See,
that
I think even that is not as sinister as controlling your
it
people.
depends what it means by the Academy monster. Like, sure, if it's just Godzilla hiding out underneath, it's not. But if it's some kind of like biotech plague
Yeah,
that's
sure.
contained, that it we'll see. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, I get what you mean. Yeah, if it's just Godzilla hiding underneath, that's just destruction. It's not
Yeah, and that's kind
oppression.
of what I'm imagining. But yeah, I mean, that has yet to be confirmed as well.
The demon under the house. Yeah.
Yes. Incidentally, this water supply thing does confirm that Mothmont is in Radham,
Yes, it does.
because I think that you had read it as if it was, and I had read it as if it was in a different town. I'd kind of been like, well, Mothmont Academy in Mothmont is a
Yeah.
feeder into Radham Academy, which is in Radham. But
Yep.
no, like
They were
it's
not
with it.
given pills.
They were not given the pills. It was in the water supply area.
Also, what happens if someone comes to visit on like a business trip or something? Like, are they just shit out of
Nobody
luck?
does that, or maybe they have like um,
Immunization pills or something?
immunization pills or something.
Like, if you're
Like
wealthy enough,
pack
you're fine to travel.
pack your own drinking water.
Yeah, like if you're wealthy enough, you're fine. But if you're poor, we can't have you leaving.
Yes, you come here,
Honestly,
you
that
stay.
feels appropriate. That feels accurate.
And of course, all the other towns, academy towns, have probably similar things. So
Their own proprietary.
even if somebody were to come here, they would probably die soon of not being where they came from.
Yeah. And like, it's worth. I mean, for what it's worth, it's not. It's not him crying. Isn't making noise on the recording thing.
You're not seeing the wiggle, you mean?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
I can hear it, which means that your mic is
It'll
picking
be
it
right.
up.
Yep. Okay. Well, Laura's with him right now, so we'll
Poor
see.
guy.
I don't know what it is.
Poor baby.
We'll give it a bit more, maybe a bit more, and then we'll.
I
I mean,
mean, if we get a bit of him crying in the background, it won't be the first time.
no. Okay. Just I don't want to be too annoying to our audience. This never happens.
Poor guy.
Anyway, yeah, as you point out in the notes here, Warren didn't get sick when he went off to university, but
Yeah, that's true.
and it might be a new thing that's happening because Warren talks about how there's like all kinds of changes in the time he was gone.
Hmm. Also, Warren's family home is a bit outside of Radham.
That's true, but also Genevieve is not affected by it, and they're no longer in Radham unless she knows how to just concoct whatever drug it is.
That's true. She probably has. Yeah, she probably just mixes her own whatever this pill is
Antidote.
that they're giving the lambs to let them go here as well.
Yeah, probably. Honestly, if she's capable of making her own ad hoc wyvern, then some
Hmm.
basic bitch death plague is an easy game for her.
Hmm.
I also wanted to point out that we learn that the Academy has stores dynamite in the bowels, but like not enough to actually do anything. Like, what's the purpose of that dynamite?
I would assume that it's just a little bit of extra firepower for when their enemies break into the bowels to steal their secrets.
Maybe it just felt like you're resorting to explosives when you have all these other things. I guess people prepare for the unpreparable, like bio-horror things, and then you don't necessarily prepare for the Academy, which is famous for using bio-horror to use mundane things like explosives.
Mhm. Yes. Well, as you know, these explosives are really exploding slugs.
Well, no, it's dynamite. The
Oh
exploding
yeah, they did
slugs
say
were already
dynamite.
dealt with on level like 2.
Fair enough.
Yeah. The other big location, well, big-ish location we talk about is Pontiac, which does lay to rest the India or Spain theories of Radom.
As if we hadn't already laid that to rest several times already.
Yeah.
So this
Um,
clearly confirms that it is, in fact, in uh,
North America.
Indian Spain.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So
Because
there are real places called Pontiac. There's Pontiac in Quebec. There's Pontiac
which
in
is actually
Sweden.
our neck of the woods.
Yes. Well, a bit further northwest.
West. I mean, it's still part of the NCR.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought Pontiac was like the area beyond the NCR, like
No,
the.
no, it's part of Outaouais. It's the Gatineau Park goes into Outaouais. It goes into Pontiac.
Okay.
Yeah, it's part of the NCR here.
I
There's also
mostly know of Pontiac as being like where all the Anglophones in Quebec live.
no, there's also the Eastern Townships.
Okay.
But yeah, um, it
I'm pretty
very
sure. I'm
cool.
pretty sure there isn't like a school for him to go to out there. Really,
But neither is there one, I think, in Pontiac, Michigan.
I kind of assumed that that was a bigger city, but I don't know.
I don't know. Well, either way, depending on where, even no matter where it is, it does establish us in our basically home area, since Pontiac was a Ottawa war leader in the late 1700s, which very firmly places him or places Radom in like this area right here where we are living.
Yeah, I think so. Um,
I think there
although
was,
I will also point out the fact that like Wildbow is from around here,
yeah,
and if he's pulling names from places he knows,
well, yeah, that I
he
think
might just be recycling the name without tying it to the.
well, the name does not exist. Pontiac does not exist outside of the context of this particular indigenous leader.
Yes. So yeah,
Yeah,
we will assume that this Pontiac
is somewhere in
is somewhere in southern Ontario or northern wherever
no,
Michigan is.
northeastern U.S. or like yeah, it's the Great Lakes ish area,
Yeah, yeah. And they say that, and all they really say about where it is that it's in the Crown's Dominion,
and
but it was
far.
a good distance away from any of the academies.
Yeah, so that leaves like Boonies, Quebec, or Boonies, Michigan as perfectly reasonable assumptions.
Yes. Yeah. We also have the name drop of where Warren's father is from, which is Cardiff,
Yep,
which the most well known Cardiff is the city in
in
Wales.
Wales.
But of course, we have literally nothing to go on as to whether he's
Actually,
actually Welsh or not.
except the fact that his wife is English German stock, which could also be Ontario immigrants.
Yes, there are a lot of English speaking German stock in Southern Ontario.
Yep.
Um, so
Yeah, so we're still
yes,
he
actually,
could.
I think you put in a note here that there is a Cardiff
Yep,
in Southern Ontario.
yep. It's right near
So,
Bancroft, which is
about
somewhere.
halfway between Pontiac, Michigan and Pontiac, Quebec.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so now we know that this is taking place in Southern Ontario,
Yep.
and or at least Pontiac is.
Well, Radom.
Warren's family being from Cardiff.
Yeah,
So Cardiff is where is Cardiff exactly?
near Bancroft or in Wales, depending.
Now, I want to see which big city it's near. I'm wondering if it's close enough to Toronto
Toronto.
to
No,
let
I think
Toronto
it's
be.
it's not. It's I mean, the GTA is like a billion miles long or kilometers
Yeah.
long, so it could
Okay,
very
so
well be in
Cardiff
like
is pretty much right smack in the middle between Ottawa and Toronto.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like literally in the middle of nowhere,
just like Pontiac.
just like Pontiac. I wonder if that's far enough from. I wonder if that's close enough to Toronto for Radom to possibly be Toronto.
I assumed
No,
the
but I think that Radom is really more of a academy. Like it's not a big city, I don't
No,
think.
but Radom to me, I don't know, just has a upstate New York vibe.
Okay,
But
I've
I,
never
I,
been
I
to
am
upstate New York,
operating
so I wouldn't know.
I'm operating on absolutely zero actual information there.
Mhm.
It's just vibes.
Yes. Anyway, I'm like still leaning on the side of Wildbow took place names that he knew and reused them for imaginary places that are elsewhere. But
I
it's
mean,
fun to imagine.
I think they just what they do as I mean, it's probably not as we know it, Pontiac, Quebec or Pontiac, Michigan, but as names they provide some geographic context
Yeah.
for like this area of the world.
Yep. Yep. No, you're right. Um, it's certainly an appropriate place name
Yeah.
for a middle of nowhere type place.
No, it's not
The
Algonquin.
the other place I want to call out, unless you had more to say about these
Nope,
place names, we have
I
the
did not.
unnamed city that Genevieve is in and that the Lambs have just arrived in.
Hmm.
They haven't given it a name, but they've mentioned that it's a town based. I don't know if it's based around or just happens to have a popular women's academy. It
I
says
missed that line in the text.
it said many a father conceded to his daughter's wishes to study, but insisted on something like this: a quiet, safe town and an unthreatening learning environment.
Oh, I didn't. I missed that completely in the description. That's interesting. And it's interesting because it brings up something that I don't think had that comes up more than once in these two chapters, but I had not noticed coming up previously, and that is discrimination within the academy's bounds.
Mm,
I mean, first there's obviously Dr. Willard D, who is the doctor who patches Jamie up in the bowels.
yep. And they
And
talk about the
he's
impact of racism on his backstory.
exactly. And also when Briggs, I think it's either Briggs or Hale, but I think it's Briggs, is talking about Genevieve, he says something along the lines of I don't have the exact text there, but I noticed it when I was reading because it was sort of fresh in my mind the like racism that Willard had experienced.
Hmm.
He says something along like, oh, she was great. She was going to be a professor despite being a woman, which is like something that we
Yeah.
had not run into in setting yet, I don't think.
I think we had with I don't remember exactly. It might have been with like Lillian's prospects or
I
maybe
thought
when we met Gladys Shipman. I'm pretty sure we had some hint of like that the women in the academy were kind of like a new thing that they were kind of like
test bedding.
tolerating rather than being like fully accepted.
Maybe it's I've forgotten about that, but
And
yeah,
like, you know, remembering also that this is taking place in the 1920s.
sure, but it's also the kind of setting and place where, as they say, knowledge is knowledge
Hmm.
where you'd think that like it's so competitive they don't really have room for nepotism hires and whatnot. Like it's if you're competent and good, it doesn't matter who you are.
Yes.
You're bringing something to the academy. And like the reverse of that is that the moment you falter or fail, you're fodder for the academy. But like it seemed surprising that as an institution, the academy would limit itself by something as trivial as biology.
Yeah, that's true, especially since biology is their whole thing.
Exactly. Like you'd think that they would be on the forefront of like, yeah, that doesn't really make a huge difference. Like if you have the capabilities, why does your, gender, your skin matter? Especially since as we find out in this chapter, you can change your skin or hair or eye color on a whim.
Yep. Yep, that's
I mean,
true.
to the point where one of Henry's shitty friends had horns, right?
Yes.
Like that seems like
I mean, I do kind of agree that you would think that they'd be um
I mean, I get
more like open to more people because they understand biology and whatever, but like
they're also
they're
old
also a big evil institution and
old
everybody knows it.
man's club
and
type
an
of
old man. Yeah, exactly. It's like I think that even despite all that, I would have been more surprised if they had not been like this underlying sexism
racism,
and
discriminatory.
racism in
Yeah,
the institution.
potentially. I don't know. It did stand out to me as like
Yeah. No, it definitely did
surprising.
get hammered a few times in these two chapters.
Oops, sorry, Billy. Um, yeah, yeah. It stood out.
Hmm. Hmm. Do we have anything else we want to say about places, or shall we move into our
Um,
monster
I
report?
I wanted to note. I think at the
Oh,
end
go ahead.
that the lambs take a train
Okay.
rather than some sort of biological thing, right?
Ah, yes.
It's a. I'm assuming it's a steam train.
Well, they don't say that it was a non-biological train. If you recall, the ships that we saw in the last
Exactly.
interlude
Yeah,
were partially biological.
that is true. So I don't know. I just wanted to note that outside of the academy, it's possible that they're just going on an old
Hmm.
choo-choo train there.
Hmm. Yep. No, I think that you're probably right. And those trains are absolutely not sinister and
I mean, they're
thinking
just run
about,
by the railroad barons, and that's perfectly fine.
yes,
Good old-fashioned industrial horror rather than bio-horror.
yes, running on coal dug out by Stitch.
Though naturally, I mean, you're gonna put a real person down there? Have you seen what coal does to their lungs?
Yeah, you co- lungs lined with coal dust are so much less useful in
Correct.
constructing Stitched.
Anything. Yep.
Yep.
All right. So as you said, Monster Corner. Pause here for Monster Corner theme.
Boys and girls of every age, wouldn't you like to see something strange?
Our usual thank yous to respective parties, Danny Elfman and I'm blanking on the name. I'm sorry, it's late.
Megafire.
Megafire. Our usual thanks to Danny Elfman and Megafire for that.
Yes. So monsters that we saw a lot of monsters in these
We
couple
did.
chapters. I wanted to call out Sub Rosa, even though she's gone.
Hmm. I mean,
We are.
she's gone, and we kind of talk about how her presence is sort of like forgotten really quickly, but she
Mhm.
does still dominate the first bit of the chapter.
Yes. Especially with Jamie,
Yeah.
because Jamie says that Sub Rosa was gentle and made him comfortable, despite the fact that she knew that Jamie was lying to her to keep her attention focused on him.
Hmm.
Which, like, we kind of saw that sort of behavior from Sub Rosa a few times.
Yeah, she strokes Sai's head gently as she passes him.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, she doesn't seem to be targeting them as children. You know, she goes after them once they start being hostile to her.
Yeah.
But from her first instinct, or like her first appearance when they're walking past them on the stairs, she ignores them.
Hmm. Yeah. But then, like, at the same time, she's very violent.
Yeah,
And, like, before she was kind and gentle to Jamie, she literally smashed him to pieces.
sure.
Um,
But when he's no longer a threat,
yeah. So
and
it's
I get,
just like there's a lot of confusing and complicated stuff going on with Sub Rosa
mhm,
that we really didn't get any answers for.
no, at all. And I don't. I mean, we might still ship Gladys Shipman is still around. She still exists as a character, so we might get stuff out of her.
Hmm.
And I mean, I guess we know that Sub Rosa got devoured by Gorger, but
Yes,
in theory, Sub Rosa's whole shtick is being alive, even when she shouldn't be. So
that's
it's
true.
possible that we might still get something from her.
Like in arc
18.
17,
Yeah,
Gorger dies and gets sliced open, and Sub Rosa crawls out.
exactly. Something like that.
The funny thing is, I can absolutely see that happening.
Well, I think it'd be a bit more subtle than just Gorger bursting open with Sub Rosa, like emerging from him like some sort of horrific butterfly.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I imagine it more like subverting Gorger from inside and like taking over, sort of
I mean,
like
she
how
still has
she.
the electrical stick on her, I think.
Well, and she also still had like, for example, well, she used that convict that way, like
Yep.
just incorporated him. So maybe she's able to. Well, we'll see,
Hmm.
won't we?
Yeah, by the end of the story, it'll be a Sub Rosa Gorger hybrid.
Exactly, a little bone saw parahuman here.
Yes. And as we mentioned before, like, once they're out of the bowels, everybody stops caring at all.
Entirely about her.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, not to bring it back to the whole biopunk type thing, but it's product of capitalism. Like, oh, move on to the next thing.
Mhm.
This problem is done. We no longer need to care.
Well, honestly, this is a quite different from what we've seen before. And admittedly, the situation is different, but like,
Yeah, she's an internal problem, not an external
mhm,
problem. It makes it's more it's beneficial to the academy to rush this all under the rug as quickly as possible because
yeah.
it's a proof of their own failures rather than an outside threat.
Hmm. Yes. And it's not like escaped issues in the bowels haven't happened before.
Exactly. It's like you just seal that thing off, lose some scientists, whatever.
Yep. No
Third
big.
time a dozen.
Hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, like I really hope that we get more from her. But I don't necessarily expect us to.
Hmm. It certainly seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Um,
Um the other monster that the big monster we've already talked about a little bit is the demon under the house here.
yes. Which they name the Radam monster. Um,
Yep.
and they say that they say sleeping away in the Radam's monster sleeping away in a chamber beneath the academy. Did she intend to wake it up and destroy Radam?
Or just take advantage of the destruction to escape.
Yeah, I feel like a monster that can destroy a whole city
Mhm.
is. I mean, I don't remember how big of a deal they mentioned that. Like they said, it was like the monster under the academy, but the fact that it could destroy the whole city
Well, isn't it one
is
of
it's a big
Ibit's
deal.
isn't it one of Ibit's like big war monsters?
I don't think they said it was Ibits.
I could be misremembering. No,
I
actually,
think
wasn't
they
it
said it was Briggs.
Briggs? Yeah, you're
I
right.
think
It
they
is
said it was
Briggs.
Briggs.
Either way, I'm pretty sure this is the gun being very well, nicely loaded and cleaned, and then hung on the mantelpiece.
Oh yeah, we're Radam's monster. This is definitely foreshadowing.
It's
What it might be foreshadowing,
don't know,
couldn't say. Wouldn't if I knew.
but it will be
Um,
fired at some point.
but it does. It does. This is. It's definitely building
Yeah,
something there. Um, there's a whole bunch of monsters in the interlude. Warren is a monster. Wendy is a monster. Frey is technically a monster.
absolutely.
Um, but they're more characters than monsters. Like
Hmm.
they're more people, and the fact that they happen to also be monstrous
Just
doesn't
by the
really
by,
matter as much. Dolores, however, um, is a
assuming
delightful little monster.
assuming Dolores is still around. In
Okay, well,
Dolores,
she definitely has the
she
little
puked up
tentacled
some
monster.
kind of horrible tentacle thingy.
Yes, whether it's still named Dolores, I don't know,
Yeah, but I would
but
like to assume.
it's very exciting to see her there. Um, I think the biggest interesting reveal was that we finally saw the whelps.
Yes, which were not a group of creepy children like I assumed they were, but rather,
No, those were the lambs.
yeah, but you'd think that there's more than one group of creepy clone children.
Yeah, so the whelps are described as bird, bug, and reptile blended together. It was the size of a large dog and surprisingly hard to kill.
And also eats a cat because Wildbow has it in for cats in this story.
Yes. I wonder if this was the maybe this was. Do you think the snake charmer's snake was part whelp?
I mean,
It
maybe
was part reptile and part.
cat though.
Yeah. Hmm.
Wasn't it part cat? Am I misremembering?
I think it might have been. Yeah. And so if I recall about the whelps, is that there are just kind of like a lot of them.
Yeah, and they like fill an area. It seems and like I do wonder how
I think
intelligent.
that's kind of implied by the name of whelp. Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know. I am not going to Google them because
Ah,
I don't want to get spoiled.
that's fair. That's fair. Um, but yeah, we got a bit of a view of them. They just seem to be little
Little beasties that sent
beasties.
out to like track. I mean, I wonder
Yeah.
if they have any kind of like intellect of their own, or if they're just like
It certainly looked
lead
like they
hound.
probably didn't. But
Yeah, they're just animals sent to track.
yep.
I wonder if they're meant to be able to deal with a threat, or they're just like find and report?
That's a good question. I think it said they had a pretty sharp beak.
Yeah, that's true. So whelps, I guess whelp can be used for like dog,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
like
isn't that
general.
what it means? It's usually like a puppy, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, and it's only used in like humans derogatorily.
Yeah. But like to me, the idea of it being a puppy just kind of means like, oh well, we need more of them. We'll just have some more puppies.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, are they manufactured or are they like cloned? Like, yeah, we'll find out. I'm sure.
They're whelped.
There's a big queen somewhere in the bowels, just
Yes.
extruding,
Like
birthing,
I'm
whelping.
that's literally what I'm assuming based on the name. It's like they're called the whelps because they're
There's
being
something whelping them.
yes.
Whelping. The more you say that word, the less real it feels.
Whelp, whelp, whelp.
Whelp, whelp, whelp.
It's so true.
But you whelp them. That's just a. It sounds so onomatopoeic after a point.
Yes.
Like it just
Hmm.
plops right out. Gross.
Lovely. Anyway, um,
Okay.
and so moving on to historical references. Actually, technically, this is an overlap because I want to talk about the bugs, Shipman's bugs. Which, oh, is he okay?
Laura just put him down. Let's try to give him minutes to fall asleep. But we'll see. We'll
Oh,
give him a 5. All right, let's keep going. Just to
okay. Um, so yeah, so this is a bit of a overlap between historical references
sure.
and Monster Corner because I want to talk about the bugs that Gladys Shipman was working on, and specifically the chemical that the lambs put on themselves to repel
Mm-hmm.
them, which in this chapter is revealed to be kerosene.
Right.
And I was like, is kerosene actually like a thing that people would do to repel insects? Would it be effective? So I did a little bit of research.
Yeah.
And it turns out that before the discovery of DEET in the 1940s, there was a plethora of things that people tried, and kerosene was one of them. And
Okay.
it was apparently used quite a lot in the Philippines,
Okay.
but it was one of the primary I don't know one of the primary, but it was like approved by the American government for use as a insecticide against mosquitoes.
Interesting.
um, so it was effective. However, it was not used in the way that Cy and Jamie
I
use it.
no.
It's not, you don't put it on yourself to prevent them biting you. You put it in standing water to prevent them from breeding.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, because mosquitoes will lay their eggs in
Right.
standing water and the larvae will grow there, if you put kerosene in it, firstly, it'll break the surface tension and
Right.
prevent the mosquitoes from laying eggs. Secondly, it will drown the larvae who are living in the
Sure.
standing water. So that was discovered to be pretty effective at killing mosquitoes. And so that became one of the approaches that the American government
Okay.
adopted for controlling mosquito population around the time of this story.
That's
So
cool.
I thought that was pretty interesting. I also
Yeah.
saw a paper that I think was suggesting that kerosene could be effective to mix with insect repellents in order to like make it aerosolize better or something.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought that was interesting. So
Absolutely. I wasn't. Yeah. Good to know. It feels a bit like one of those things that people sort of, troops in MASH or whatever kind of like figure out and do
mhm,
without any kind of official backing. Just like, hey, this
mhm,
works for
yeah,
us.
but also like from what I understand, like in terms of like repelling actual insect bites,
Yeah.
they kind of just did whatever they could think of to try. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot
People
of
were
people
wearing
were like,
kerosene.
well, kerosene is used to control mosquito populations. Let's dilute it and wipe it on ourselves to prevent them biting us
Yep.
and hope for the best. So I'm sure that happened quite a
Oh,
lot.
definitely.
Would not
Almost
surprise
certainly.
me. We
Yeah.
put in a few notes here on some stuff we talked about already.
I guess I want to add on the whole racism and sexism in Twig World. And I guess it's probably the fact that the Academy is taking in, I guess, women and minorities as members of the Academy is sort of a reflection of the real world's industrial places taking women laborers during the war when all the men are sent away.
Hmm.
I just
Yeah, I
assuming
think that
that's a
I think
parallel
that
there.
was very textually explicit, wasn't it?
It
Um,
might have been. It's been a minute since we read that.
it says much as was the case with the women who'd worked at the academy during wartime.
Oh, in which case I
The
completely missed that line.
the academy had decided that even if someone was black, knowledge was knowledge.
Okay, yeah, then I missed that part of that line.
So yeah, definitely the role of women working during wartime being
Is
as
called out.
important
Yeah.
in this world as it was in the real world.
Yep. Though I'm wondering what that means in terms of the Academy's context. 'Cause I don't imagine that the Academy scientists are going and fighting on the front lines. Like they're developing the weapons, they're building the things. They're not, like you're not going to take Professor Ibbot of biohorror fame and give him a gun and put him on the front line.
No,
And
but you might be like, Ibit, go to like the backline or whatever it's technically called and design war monsters.
potentially,
And then they're like, well, somebody needs to
we got a bunch
be
of
in
office
charge of
space
the
here.
yeah, somebody needs to be in charge of like the stitch that repair the that trim the plants in town.
I guess. I guess.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was plenty of non-war related biotech that needed to be worked on while all the men were off working on war stuff.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, that's valid.
Or maybe they did send the scientists to the front lines. Who knows?
Oh, I mean, maybe it just, yeah, feels like Ibit could have been making Godzilla just as easily, probably more easily in the Academy than he
That's
could have been
true.
making Godzilla out, like, on the
Hmm.
bombed out ruins of San Jose or whatever.
Yes.
All right, anything else you want to talk about in terms of historical reference? We've talked about Pontiac already. We've talked about the nationalization of the industries by the crown.
Yeah,
Um,
with the Duke taking over. I think
yep,
we've covered all the historical references we found.
sure.
So let's move on to characters, which is there's a lot of characters because we've got two completely different casts for our two different
Yeah.
chapters, and also like there's some talk about like the Wyvern project and Sai and Genevieve, and it reminded me of some stuff in Worm. But
Hmm.
because it's like big spoilers for Worm, I think that maybe we'll do it at the end of the episode,
Makes
like a
sense.
sort of back to Worm type deal.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense.
So yeah, but aside from that, with Sylvester, there are a lot of interesting character beats for Sylvester in this, and this is just in the
Absolutely.
one chapter because he's not in the second chapter at all. Um, the first one being like when he's trying to care for Jamie and the doctors are trying to care for Jamie, and Sylvester is actually resenting the doctors for caring for Jamie and not being him,
Yeah.
which was kind of sweet, honestly, but also like that's some pretty deep jealousy.
Well, absolutely. It's a very deep seated resentment there.
Yeah. But I think he does a good job of taking care of Jamie and advocating for him and being a good friend. So,
Well, and I mean, and he doesn't seem to be entirely or even at all antagonistic towards Willard either. He says, oh, my friends call me Cy or Sly, but my name is Sylvester. Then I think Willard recognizes that, oh, this kid does not want to be patronized too, so calls him Sylvester. And
uh-huh.
then Cy says, if you save him, I can be Cy. Like this,
Yeah.
it's a sign of openness or like
Hmm.
respect that we don't see much from him
Yeah. And I kind of
towards.
put that down to like desperation, being like,
Yeah,
my friend is dying, I'll do anything. But
yeah.
you're right.
Like I said, it seemed like a level of respect that he doesn't usually have for anybody
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
authority
No, you're right.
except Hale.
And even then, his respect for Hale is very superficial, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in addition to being a really good friend to Jamie, he's also actually genuinely nice to Lillian. And
Yep. She's suspicious, but
yeah, but like, last time he was comforting her, I was like, this is clearly like performative. But this
I
time
had
he's actually genuinely comforting her.
I had not read it as performative last time. I felt like it was just as genuine there as it is
Yeah,
here.
that's true. We had a bit of an argument, I think, last time. But
Yeah.
this time I'm completely like
on board.
This is actually kind of him. He's being
Absolutely.
nice. And even like when Jamie calls
But
him out on it, he
Jamie doesn't
pretends.
call him out. He brings it up to Jamie out of the blue to know if Jamie doesn't say anything, and Sai
He
says
hints
it.
it at Sylvester. Let me pull up
Does
the
he?
quote.
Let me.
Let me pull
Yeah,
up the.
I'm finding it. Oh, he just says, "I've seen the better side of you. You don't have anything to worry about."
Yes.
But that's I felt that's just overall statement, not just that.
Yeah, but Sai understands that he means his
I,
behavior towards Lillian, and that's
I
why
felt
he
like it was just
says,
overall all of the rest of Sai, talking about sacrificing himself, everything that Sai has done these past arcs. That's Jamie saying, "You're not as bad as you think you are," and
"Mhm,
Sai's like, "Well, clearly he
you're
just." I think Sai is deluding himself or convincing himself that Jamie just means this particular instance.
okay." Yeah, that's true. So maybe Jamie wasn't referring to that specifically,
I
but
don't.
it was like Sai brings it up because Jamie said
Yes.
that I've seen that you're a decent person,
Yeah, but like the way.
and Sai goes back to that by denying I was being nice to Lillian. I was just doing it because she was annoying.
Yeah.
And Jamie was
And then
like,
Jamie
"What?"
says like, "Wait, what?" Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Like I forgot that it seemed to me that Jamie's response there is like, "I forgot. I completely forgot that you did that. I was talking about
Mhm.
something else." But sure. Okay, if
Yeah,
that's what you want to say, then sure.
yeah. To me, that was like Jamie being like, "Oh, that's not what I was referring to." But now that I know what you're talking about, uh, sure, you tell yourself that
Yeah, I
because
agree with you there. Like
yes,
it's
yeah. So Sylvester being kind pretends it's because of of her crying, but Jamie doesn't buy it. We don't buy it. He was
nobody
being nice
buys
to
it.
her, although he does still call her Lil.
That is true. That is very
Yeah. And then there's this whole conversation about romantic interest, which is
yes.
just so great and so, like,
It just feels so Psy.
yes.
Like he's
But
so
also like, we've been talking a lot about how Sai has a crush on Mary and doesn't realize it.
yep.
And then Mary asks him if he's jealous of Gordon and Shipman.
Yep.
And he completely misunderstands, possibly deliberately.
I don't. It doesn't feel
It
deliberate to
doesn't
me.
feel deliberate though. And then it turns out that he like completely is oblivious to all of the romantic inclinations of everybody in the group.
Yeah, there's been all these like love triangles and drama and romance,
Yeah.
and Sai has just been drifting through it,
So
oblivious,
I'm going to read
shaking
this.
his box of bugs.
I'm going to read this whole thing because
Sure.
it's just so great. I shook my head. First one of us to reach that point, I guess, referring to Gordon being the first to,
Yeah.
be interested in someone. The moment of silence that followed the statement caught me off guard. Which point? Mary asked. Liking someone? I asked back, a little. No, Jamie said softly, head down against his pillow, eyes closed. No, Mary said. No, Lillian said uncertainly. Gordon's a late bloomer, all things considered, Helen said. All eyes fell on me. The latest of bloomers, it seemed.
It's just such a great line. This is like they had none of them have ever realized that this was something that Sai had ever thought about or like been. I don't even know if concerned is the right word, but like it's like
Mhm.
what? How could
Yeah.
you possibly? What are you talking about, Sai?
So I just think this is so hilarious and brilliant because A, it's funny on its own.
Yeah.
B, it's Cy being so completely oblivious about his own feelings towards Mary.
Yep.
And I don't even know what number I'm on anymore. Cy's whole thing that he cares about himself is his ability to read people and know what
Oh yeah. But I mean,
motivates them.
as
Which
we know,
we've talked about every time that he's not as good at that as he thinks he is. But
no,
this is a
exactly.
major blind spot for someone who is so
It's
convinced of his
wild.
own abilities.
It's wild. Like absolutely wild.
Yes.
That
And then the fact that every single one of the other lambs
everyone else there is like, no, I've had a crush. Like,
is
what are you
like,
talking about?
yes. And
And also probably Jamie. I'm just picturing Jamie there, like, no, Sai, you've had a crush before too. Like,
yes.
what are you talking about?
In fact, this is why all the others immediately recognize how
Yeah,
he's feeling about Mary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh man,
yeah.
Sigh, you're such a little kid.
Oh yeah. Pulling
I
tails and
think that little bit was one of my favorite moments of this whole story so far, to be
I
honest.
agree. Yeah, that was fun.
We got some more details about Wyvern, which we've
Yep.
talked about a little bit,
Mhm.
it being a performance drug for students in general. Um, and Psi was being used as a stress test for how it behaves under maximum dosages.
Yeah, but they toned that down when he became a lamp, apparently.
I don't. I'm not sure if they like lowered his dosages when he became a lamb, or if they stopped like increasing them and to see
Yeah.
what would happen.
Well, it
I
says we
feel
left
like,
things be as they were, which I mean, considering
yeah.
he still has his appointments, probably means they have him at a stable dosage.
I feel like it seems like a bit of lucky happenstance that Psy
Yes,
ended up in the Lambs Project
agreed.
because, if Hale is like, well, we have the Lambs Project and we have a few missing pieces because a couple of our
Lambs
planned
died.
lambs didn't make it. And it so happens that we've got this guinea pig from the Wyvern test that would actually fit in pretty well and isn't needed for testing Wyvern anymore.
Hmm.
That's pretty lucky that that happened that way.
It is, absolutely is.
Or maybe it was all like
Hale planned
deliberately. Maybe this was a one of Psy's earliest Rube Goldberg machines. Was engineering his own
success.
transfer from the Wyvern drug trials to the Lambsbridge project. I could actually see that being a thing.
Yeah, honestly. We already mentioned the last thing here.
Which is that his first thought about Frey is that he has a sister.
Which is, I want to say, very interesting as a line, considering everything else we've seen about how he thinks about the lambs.
Well, we
So,
have kind of mentioned that even though he treats the other lambs as family, he doesn't see them as siblings.
here's.
Um,
Yeah, that's
so,
true.
and we kind of thought he was in denial, but like maybe it really is more like these are my friends and not my siblings.
Yeah,
But
potentially.
Frey is a sibling, even if she isn't a friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious to see how
hmm
they bounce off each other.
Oh, absolutely. This will be fun. I'm hoping.
Mhm.
In terms of our other lambs,
Yep.
Jamie was a big part of it, mostly due to being the subject of
Some Rosa's
Sub
ministrations,
Rosa. Yes, and we've talked about his thoughts on Sub Rosa and how he feels guilty about her.
and
I
how no one else cares.
Yes, he's the only one who cares about Sub Rosa, which
He,
is just another example of Jamie being the sensitive and thoughtful
well,
one
it's
in the
honestly
group.
surprising because Sai, throughout most of this arc, wants Sub Rosa to give him answers. But the moment that she's no longer available, he's like, oh well, that's it.
hmm
Like, he's not frustrated at all that it played out the way it is for him to not get answers.
Well, I think that it's just things pushing that thought out of the way. Like he wants the answers, but he wants more for Jamie to be okay.
That's valid. Yeah, that's true.
So, of all of them, I feel the least
Surprised?
surprised at Side not caring about the mystery.
Valid.
I also thought it was interesting the way because like before, whenever it comes to Jamie's scars, there's always been all this secrecy about it. Like, don't look. Like, we'll need to get someone specific to tend to him who already knows about what his deal is, and blah blah blah.
I
And
assumed,
I know this is an emergency situation, but
yeah,
I felt like it was a bit more like cavalier about like okay, well, we'll take the shirt off, and
I
I
thought,
can't tell you what the scars are for, but
just
you
don't cut
know
into them. You're fine.
yeah.
I thought for the most part the scars and like the thing was more Jamie's own perception of them, at least around Sai. No, he changes by like turning away from Sai and like
hmm
the other lambs. I
Yeah, but
don't
you'd think that Psy
remember.
would like insist on putting like some sort of screen or barrier or telling the other scientists to like
I
turn
think,
around or something.
as you said, it's more a question of Sai has other things on his
Yeah.
mind, namely Jamie's
And I think that's
survival.
the only explanation that I can think of
Yeah,
for why he's so cavalier about
Jamie's
all of the
privacy and
doctors
Jamie's.
being present while Jamie's being operated on.
Yeah.
Mary, I only had one little thing to say about Mary, and that's that in addition to her knives and wire that we've seen before, she apparently also keeps ribbons and combs in her arsenal on her person.
She
And
has to
who
stay.
knows what else she might have
Mm-hmm.
on there. Like, you know, she'll be kind of walking along and then, like, pull a bazooka out of one of her braids or something, and it won't even be
Yeah.
surprising anymore.
And in relation to that, I thought it was interesting that she. I think this is like one of the first times that we've seen her full of like nervous tension when they're waiting for the lockdown to be lifted. Mary's
Okay.
watched and spent sharpening her knives until Gordon muttered something rude at her. And then immediately she stops sharpening her knives, which I guess makes noise, but to coiling and then uncoiling and then recoiling all her razor wires.
Yep. I can see that. That seems very in character for her.
I also wanted to point out that Hale says to her, "Mary, I know you don't know the full details about the projects unless they've told you things they shouldn't." And then Sai thinks, "We had."
Typical.
Yep.
I'm
Like,
pretty
of course,
sure. I'm pretty sure Hale
knows that.
knows that they told her. He knows that there's no way Sai would not have told her, and he just like says this in order to kind of rub it in on them that like I know you're up to shenanigans. I think you muted yourself.
I did. I was going to say, it's plausible deniability for him.
Yes, yes. And then Helen, I had a couple of
Hmm.
notes. I mean, she put herself back together pretty okay. Like we saw she was all deformed and whatever, and we're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not going to be happy about that. But she just
She's
kind of
like,
puts herself back together and
it's
is,
like her limbs a bit still stretchy and bruised,
yeah.
but like not dislocated.
Hmm. But the biggest thing about Helen is that just as we were saying that Sai has this huge blind spot when it comes to romance,
She does
Helen
not.
does not. She knows and is completely on it. And
Well, and she's the one that one would expect to have the blind spot, considering both her background and her upbringing.
yes.
Like it's surprising that she has the context to be as empathetic as she is,
Hmm.
because it's not just that, she's also so comforting of Sai while Jamie is being operated upon.
Yes.
Like, you know, yeah, Helen, if I had to describe Helen after this arc in like one word, surprisingly enough, is empathetic is the word,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
which
absolutely.
one would not expect from Sai's descriptions and interpretations of her.
Yep.
And I don't
Yep.
think it's fake empathy.
Yeah. And I liked after she accurately describes all of the rationales behind Gordon and Shipman feelings towards each other. Sai says, "So what? Are you Miss Cupid now?" I asked. "You pay attention to this sort of thing?" "I prefer Aphrodite," Helen said, still smiling. "And I'm working on it."
Yep. Which, of course,
Delightful. Delightful.
I mean, and of course, Galatea, her project name, was brought to life by Aphrodite
Well, there you go.
because he fell in love with his statue.
Yes. I mean,
And
Helen is supposed to become the femme fatale, which means
yep,
she's supposed to take an interest in
absolutely.
romantic things. So, makes sense.
I would like to think that she's familiar with the myth and chose to mention that deliberately.
Oh, probably. Shall we move on to other people?
Absolutely.
I think the other people we saw in 3.10, we've already talked about
I
quite a
think we've
lot. We have Dr.
talked about.
Willard,
Yep.
and Briggs, and Hale, and we've already said pretty much everything there is to say about them.
The only thing I wanted to bring up, or I guess two things, is that when Briggs talks about he's losing his job, Sai immediately looks to Hale in like concern and sympathy, and Briggs is like,
Assuming that Hale would be losing his job as
"Yeah,"
well.
and then Briggs is, "No, like Hale's fine, don't worry, that's me."
Hmm.
And the way that Briggs brought it up, it's just the way it was phrased, and it might just be me reading too much into it. The It felt that the way that he presented his role and losing the role is talking about the entire Crown States. It felt like Briggs is running the Academy system and not just Radham. And maybe I read too much into that line, but the way it
Interesting.
was phrased is like, oh, there's unrest in the Crown States, and say they need someone at the head of the academy that they can trust, or the academies that they can trust. So they're putting this Duke in charge.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I feel like that would still make sense, even just in the context of Briggs running the one academy of many. But
Potentially, but
that's an interesting. I definitely think Briggs probably would have had a higher opinion of his own importance as
yeah.
head of
I mean, I don't
Radom.
I don't feel that Briggs runs the academy system. It's just the way he phrased it made it seem
Mhm.
like he did. It just
Yeah,
like there's a disconnect between his phrasing and his actual
sure.
role.
Yeah. So maybe Briggs does think that being head of Radom
Gives him authority
is like more important to the whole academy system than probably it is.
for sure.
I wonder what'll happen to Briggs now. Do you think they'll like send him into the bowels as a
Probably he's going to be replacing what was it, Sub Rosa's old role as just like coordinating the bowels,
yeah, or maybe he's going to replace Sub Rosa's new role as being like a
the monster in the
head
bowels.
honcho of the academy turned into monster after being no longer useful.
Potentially.
I guess we'll see. He'll be another character to look out for in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like he has probably still too much authority and power to be just gotten rid of just like
Mm,
that.
yeah.
Because I think they described him as like a schmooze or someone who had the social abilities that some of the other professors did not.
Hmm. Yeah. Certainly he has like the affectation of someone in importance. You know, we saw
Yeah,
him with his big fancy meeting room and
exactly.
drinking wine with the others, and certainly he has an expectation of a level of importance that he's not going to give up lightly, I don't think.
I agree. But I guess this might be setting up some kind of political conflict between the Crown and Radom.
Maybe. Neutral response. The people we see in the interlude in 3.x enemy,
Yep,
we've talked a lot about a bunch of them.
yep.
Um,
We've already talked about Warren.
we've already talked about Warren. I did want to say that like this past year has been really shitty for him, and he actually seems to be doing surprisingly okay.
I think because of Wendy. Like, she provides this grounding that
That's true. That's true.
he would
But
have,
I
I
would
think,
kind of have expected him to still be like,
lost his
so
mind.
traumatized as to be like, but no, he's like actually being a pretty decent sidekick for
Yep.
Genevieve, and yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Maybe he is still super broken on the inside, but
I mean, I'd be very surprised if he were not.
yeah, I mean, he is a lot driven by anger and desire for revenge, which is one form of being broken. So that tracks.
I mean, yep, I'm curious to see what we get of him later on. I mean, presumably we're not going to get much. Wait, I just had a thought.
Okay,
Enemy. Enemy is from his perspective, not Genevieve.
that is true.
He is the enemy. Genevieve is still a protagonist that we have encountered.
Or maybe it means that like Genevieve is going to be killed off in the next chapter, and Warren's going to become the main
Potentially.
one.
The thing that they're hunting and targeting.
Yes.
Yeah, potentially. But it just, so far, of the 2 out of 3 enemy chapters have been from the perspective of an enemy that we have already seen. This is a break, both in that we're we're led to assume that Genevieve is the next arc's antagonist, but the enemy arc that comes from her, that is ostensibly leading us to her, is not is not from her perspective, which
Hmm.
is giving us, I don't know what it's telling us, but it's telling us something. Well, and it's also interesting because so far the enemies, or the 2 previous enemy arcs, have given us context to the motivations and actions of the antagonist of the previous arc. This one
Yes,
seemingly does not.
that's true because this is also the enemy of the next arc, or what
Yeah,
is being set up to be the enemy of the next
yeah,
arc.
yeah. We're not getting anything new on Sub Rosa, on Shipman, or anything. Like, if I had to guess who this arc would have been ahead of time, who this enemy would have been ahead of time, I would have guessed from Gladys Shipman's
Hmm.
perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. Anyway, um, we also have Warren's father, Clifford Howell.
Yes, and I kind of just wanted to bring up Clifford and also Henry,
Hmm.
and also to be honest, like there was a doctor at Clifford's
Yeah, but like,
house when he showed up, And it's like these three characters are there throughout this entire first section of the chapter,
But they
but
don't matter.
they don't matter. They're very one note. Like Warren's dad is just there to like
He's like the disapproving
oppose.
stately father.
Yeah,
Like
and
it doesn't.
Henry is just like the jackass who betrays him, and then
He's the shitty friend who leads him astray.
yes,
Like this is we've all seen this movie, you know.
hmm yes. I did want to say that Warren's dad did have a perspective that was very interesting. We talked about this sort of like Luddite
Hmm.
attitude outside of the academy towns, but Warren's dad specifically seeing like this DNA modification
Yeah,
that Warren got in his eyes to make them stronger and change the color.
yeah,
And he sees it as like a danger to his legacy. It's
yeah.
like, you know,
You're no
we
longer
passed
my
on
son entirely.
our genes to you, and you've replaced them with these modified ones, and so now we're no longer part of that lineage
Yep.
of yours. And so, yeah, he says, "You're no longer my son." Not even in the disowning sense, but in the literal
Just like
sense. Like,
biologically, you're not my DNA anymore.
yes. I thought that was just a really interesting perspective because it's not just like new thing bad. It's like
Yeah.
an actual like
Reasoning,
sort of
logic. Yeah.
philosophical objection to this,
Hmm.
which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And like his mother seems to be like, "Oh, we'll work it out, don't worry." But
Hmm.
of course that goes nowhere because
Yeah. Oh yeah. Add her to the list with the doctor and Henry
yeah.
of people who were there too.
Yep.
And I
Um
suppose also the scientist who experimented on Warren because
oh,
he was
he's
pretty
this
evil, but all he did was like transform him, and he I don't even know if we saw him actually.
I think we did, but like he's in another story the lambs would have been sent after him instead of the snake charmer.
Yep.
Like he's that exact same
Hmm.
character
Yep.
from our perspective.
Yep. And of course they don't care about him because he's experimenting on people. They care about him because he's spreading
Out
the forbidden knowledge.
He's outside of the bounds of the academy.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and then there's also Wendy, who is the Stitched who belongs to his mother
Hmm.
or his father, his mother sends her to take care of him, and
Yeah.
she does so very well and very much throughout the course.
Hmm.
And she is, I think, we've had hints of Stitched before, not just being mindless automatons, but she is
Hmm.
very explicitly a person with her own
Yes.
desires and wants and needs
Hmm.
and no ability. She's like definitely infantilized as a person, but
Yeah.
she still has, she's still a person.
Yes.
And
No, I
we've
agree
not seen
100%.
that from Stitched before, I don't think, really.
Hmm. I wonder if, like, Warren mentions or thinks that Wendy is a much better constructed Stitch than many he'd had encountered.
Sure, that's true.
But I wonder how much Wendy's perspective can be extended to other Stitch.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, do all the other Stitch have as much personality
like, do they
as
all?
Wendy
Yeah,
once you get to know them? Or is she like an unusually
but I mean, why would she be unusual?
by
Like,
happenstance? Like it would
l-
have to be
yeah, it
because
would have to be happenstance, and what, like, that would be too big of a coincidence, I think.
yeah, probably.
Like, I feel like, yeah, sure, probably stitched soldiers who are just these ramshackle assortments of bodies stitched together and sent back into battle probably don't have the same kind of awareness and stuff. But, like, they talk about that one stitch that went crazy and killed a bunch of people
Hmm.
because it started remembering too much.
Yep.
They talk about, yeah, like I don't know. It seems even more horrifying than what we've seen before because if Wendy is representative, then it's basically a slave caste of people who have been turned into like mental children and then enslaved.
Yes. Absolutely. Like like the idea of all of the Stitched being as aware and as personable. I say
Yeah.
personal. That's not the right word, but Yeah, exactly. Just as you said, it's essentially a slave caste of mentally
Yeah,
disabled people,
yeah,
and it's horrific.
like
But
yeah,
Wendy
like
herself is delightful, and
absolutely, and
I love her.
she has her little song that she likes and her teddy bear that she wants to go back to,
Yeah.
like, and it's just it's horror.
hmm
Yeah.
Honestly,
Um.
I'm happy for her that she's in company of Genevieve.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a safe place to be, but at least Genevieve seems
Yeah.
to be supportive of her.
And I kind of feel like she got lucky in a way that Warren was being it feels like this scientist was like, "Oh cool, this stitched is going to do the work I need to do to like keep this head living. I don't need to bother about it.
Mhm.
Fine, do whatever you want to, and it makes life easier for me." And then there is also Genevieve Frey as a character.
Yeah. So,
I don't
last but not least, the
well, I
most
think
important character in this whole discussion.
and still with not much to say about her that we haven't already said.
Yeah. Like,
Because
as we mentioned before, she's barely in it.
yeah, but
Um, she,
she's pivotal, but she's barely in it.
yeah, she's mentioned at the end of 3.10, and then she shows up at the end of 3.x and is a total badass and like,
Yeah,
escapes with Warren and Wendy, and her glee at seeing the lambs is interesting and uncomfortable, and
yep,
yeah, so she's
absolutely.
super fascinating. I did want to kind of just bring up her name. I think we talked about this in Boyle, and we hinted at it earlier, because this is a name that could be English or French, and
Genevieve.
Genevieve is a not uncommon name around here.
No,
So probably we'll accidentally call her Genevieve a few times.
I'm pretty sure I already have
Yeah,
defaulted to
yeah,
Genevieve, but
yeah. But given that the whole uh, English British Empire feel of
oh
this
yeah,
and the
it should
very
be
Englishness of
Genevieve.
all the names, it should be Genevieve. And
Absolutely.
I kind of also want to throw some shade at all the people who complain about Wildbow Englishizing the French names of his characters.
I know
Like,
where you're going with this. Please do carry on.
I was just gonna say, like, even if you're upset at Wildbow for the pronunciation of French names, like Genevieve is a well-established English name in its own right,
Absolutely.
and
And we're in
so
an area of the world where there's so much overlap and crossover without even counting the like historical overlap and crossover of the French influence on the British Isles. Like
mhm,
it makes yeah, the names are
yeah,
there's so many names that are applicable to both
mhm,
languages, yeah.
yeah,
Without even the immediate context of the like Anglo-Canadian and Quebecois
yep,
barrier there.
yep. So anyway, I'm not going to go hugely into that whole rabbit hole and start ranting about
I thought you were about to talk about the
Marquis.
Belanger again.
I could talk about that because, like, okay, well, now that you've brought it up,
Well, let me just say, my default reading that is Alexander Bélanger.
yeah. So in Pale, there's a character named Alexander Bellinger, who you would normally read as Bélanger. But according to the audiobook pronunciation guide, was confirmed with Wildbow to be pronounced Bellinger. Now, it is entirely possible that this was not Wildbow saying his name should be pronounced Bellinger, but rather that it was like the audiobook creators said, we're calling him Bellinger, is that okay? And him being like, sure, whatever.
But,
Which is an entirely different thing. But the fact is that in this part of the world, especially like Eastern Ontario, Northern Ontario,
mhm,
there are people who have French ancestry and have been Anglophone for generations and have names like Bellinger, Hebert. We saw Hebert in one of the stories as well.
or, Avril Lavigne.
Levine, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, my a guy I used to work with, his wife's name was Gagnon, which in
With,
most French areas is pronounced Gagnon.
yeah, it's a very common Quebec name, but,
Yeah,
like
but
Quebec
it's
last
pronounced
name, but
Gagnon because
absolutely, because
yeah,
they've been Anglo for
yeah,
300 years.
yeah. So like some people complain about that, and honestly, like in terms of things like Marquis, you can kind of see where they're coming from. But in terms of names like Bellinger or stuff like that, like this is just the beauty and diversity of language at
Absolutely.
play.
Yeah.
And Genevieve is yet another example of this, with her beautifully English name derived from
French.
medieval French or wherever it comes from.
Yeah. Probably some Norman
Yeah.
name. Also, I really like that name, Genevieve. Genevieve especially.
Yeah. There was a girl at my high school named Genevieve. She mostly went by Jen.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? I'm actually looking that up. Genevieve origin. I'm like assuming it's Norman. Oh, it's a Celtic Germanic name.
Oh, so maybe it came to French from Germanic languages.
Yep, Genovova, with a women of the family, and the war name origin is French. Okay, and it's also related to Guinevere, obviously.
Yes,
actually,
I did know that.
which is, and then there's an original Welsh version of that, and apparently a cognate name in modern English is Jennifer.
Oh, is that cognate? I
Which
thought
makes
that was
sense,
just a
actually.
coincidence. But yeah, it does when you think of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jennifer sounds like it should be Latin because it ends in fur.
That's true.
Like Lucifer is Latin, and
It's the Cornish form of Guinevere.
Interesting.
From Proto-Celtic. But the thing is, Proto-Celtic is so closely related to, like, Proto-Latin that it's so entirely possible that there's just a lot of commonalities there.
Turns out all names are the same when you go far back enough.
Exactly.
They're all derived from ooh ooh ooh.
Yep. All right. Anything else you want to say about Genevieve?
No. Let's move on to our discussion question.
Sure. So we have two active ones right now. The first
Well,
being,
we have one plus a bonus.
Sure. Which one of the lamb's abilities would you want to have?
That was Alexandra who brought us that one. And
Yep.
we got two answers. I really liked Hobo Demon's answer a lot. So let's get into this.
Sure. Dig in.
So the thing about persistence hunting,
Says Hobo Demon.
says Hobo Demon, isn't that you are tracking a wounded animal. It's that the animal isn't adapted to thermoregulate over repeated sprints away from pursuers following at a constant clip. See, humans are unique among mammals in having adapted their mammary glands towards a wider set of purposes, including thermoregulation by evaporative cooling. Sweat is, in terms of evolutionary biology, a kind of milk. And etymologically, the word milk is derived from the Proto-Indo-European melg, meaning to rub, and it came to be used in turn for substances expressed from a source through the process of rubbing. And that is how we can segue through Hamlet references to my envy of Sylvester's ability to, by method of rubbing his friends the wrong way, nourish them with the milk of parahuman kindness and plot them each to another in a great wibbly-wobbly. I've lost the thread. Anyway, I wish I was half as good at a bullshit artist and a good friend.
So we will talk about most of that later.
I was just going to say, like, that was just like the most beautiful string of
Bullshit.
references to things that we've talked about, strung together into a vague form of sense, and I'm in awe.
It was great.
Yeah. But yes, I did do, like, I was intrigued by this idea of sweat being evolved from milk, and I did a bit of research and decided to make that our bio fact of the week. So we will talk about that.
Stay tuned.
In a bit. But we do have more responses.
Yep. So
Sweet Manzana, sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, we'll say Sweet Manzana says, I have such a bad memory, I would gladly take Jamie's, which is a very ominous way of saying that. You know?
Just like scoop it out of his brain and
exactly.
put it into I will be honest, I also have a bad memory, and I would also gladly take Jamie's.
Me too, honestly. Though It would be nice to have Gordon's, like, easy charisma.
Yes. Honestly, I was kind of thinking of this question, and I was thinking, like, oh, it would be nice to have Jamie's ability to remember things because that would help me, like, you know, be more successful when my memory fails me, sort of thing. Or I wish I had, you know, size abilities for much of it. And then I'm like, honestly, I could just wish for Gordon's ability to just be good at everything, and then that would cover all the bases.
Yep. Don't need to be amazing at everything, just good.
Yeah. Yeah, so those were good answers. I like those a lot.
Yep.
We also had a bonus question, which was, what would the project names for Mary and Lillian be, since they're not actual projects?
And
And
Only a Bird said, "Oh, for the project names of Lillian and Mary, I liked Project Cuckoo for Mary, which I think I had suggested in the last episode, but I think she wouldn't. Her preference would be Project Nike. Lillian might be Project Apollo, though I think she'll transition towards something like Project...
oh, I deleted the last half of the sentence because it was a spoiler for later in
Oh,
Twig.
okay.
um,
Spoilers.
she will transition towards something which you will find out about later.
Dun dun dun.
And then Bird suggested an expansion of that question, which we've decided to adopt as our new discussion question.
It's a
And
cool
it
one.
is, let's assume that the already named lambs got to rename their project to align with how they'd like to develop, rather than how they're being developed. What would each pick? And I think that's a really great question.
It is a cool question. I don't have any answers offhand, just like that, so I'm excited to see what people provide us.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about this episode before we dive into things? Do you want to do our Backed to Worm at the very end, or do you want to do it here?
Let's do it at the very, very end.
Okay, sounds good. So, any kind of recommendations or anything right now? Anything you're reading or...
This morning I finished reading The Five People You Meet in Heaven.
Not familiar with it?
Yeah, it's a fairly short book, very literary. It's about a guy who dies and goes to heaven and meets people,
Five people?
five people, who tell him their stories and how they intersected with his life.
Okay.
It's a beautiful little story.
You liked it?
I liked it. I don't usually like literary fiction very much because I find it too depressing.
Sure.
But this one was short and sweet, and it was nice. I liked it.
Sure. It sounds nice.
How about you? What have you been reading?
I am reading currently something called Vintage Crimes. It's just a sort of talking about the various kinds of frauds associated with wine and like prestige winemaking throughout history.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I'm still really only in the Roman era in the book, so still
Was a
got
lot of
quite a
fraud
ways of
going
history.
along in the Roman wine industry.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so it's interesting. It's just like because there's so little ways back then to like authenticate things. I mean, even now there's like it's so hard to authenticate origin and provenance and anything like that. Just like people would bottle whatever and then pretend it was like prestige wine and sell it.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yep. Other than that, I just watched the Fallout show, which definitely has at least one Twig related episode.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was fun.
I've never gotten into Fallout, so
Ever
I
like you
didn't.
never tried them or not? Like never clicked with you, or did you never try them?
I've never tried them.
Okay. No, I really enjoyed the show. Had a lot of fun watching it.
Cool. Yeah, I know. I know a lot of people were excited about that coming out, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Have you watched anything? I know you just finished the first Spider-Verse movie, which is fun.
Yeah, I watched that. Did a live watch in the Doof Discord, which was super fun.
It was. I enjoyed that.
A lot of people were were. It was like as soon as I admit that I hadn't seen it, and everyone was like, "You have to watch it. You have to watch it." And I was like, "So many people are invested in me watching this movie," and it was kind of fun.
And I'm looking forward to you doing the second movie.
I will definitely be doing that.
Cool. All right. Anything else you want to talk about before
Let's get right into the outro.
All right, so everybody, thank you for listening. We hope you'll continue along with us with this trip into Twig, which you can read along with us at twigserial.wordpress.com. And if you do, or even if you don't, please go to Wildbow's Patreon at www.patreon.com/Wildbow and support him. It's how he can produce all these great stories and settings, including the currently running Claw. Please leave your answers to our discussion in our Reddit thread or our Doof Discord thread.
As always, you can reach us at totwigpodcast@gmail.com. TO Twig Podcast on the platform formerly known as Twitter. The Reddit thread will have in r/parahumans and our discussion thread in the Doof Discord. Kind thanks as always to them for letting us squat in their Discord. And next episode, we will be covering a new arc, Stitch in Time 4.1 and 4.2.
As I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned that before, but I mean, I'm pretty sure we're just going to be covering Wrinkle in Time, right?
Yes, clearly.
All right, and you had the biofact here. You did some research on hobo demons.
Yeah. So on the subject of milk, the connection between milk and sweat, I was like, that sounds interesting, and I read way more than I ever expected to about sweat
Milk.
glands and uh, and how they work. So it turns out there are two completely different types of sweat glands.
Okay.
There are eccrine sweat glands, which are smaller and shallower and tend to be found on like bare skin. And then you have apocrine sweat glands, which are deeper and bigger and tend to be attached to hair follicles.
Okay.
So in humans, we have eccrine sweat glands all over the body, and we have apocrine sweat glands mostly like under the arms, between the legs, places like that.
So eccrine tends to do more for cooling, I assume, than apocrine?
Yes, so I'm getting to that.
Okay.
On other animals, it's a little bit different. For example, on dogs, they have eccrine sweat glands mostly just on the pads of their feet,
Okay. So,
but they have apocrine sweat glands elsewhere on their body.
if I may ask quickly, do they produce the same kind of sweat?
They do not. Um,
Okay.
so eccrine sweat is I don't remember specifically the differences, but the eccrine sweat tends to be thinner. I think the apocrine sweat is stinkier, which
Okay.
is why your underarm sweat has that characteristic body odor. So from what I read, it seems that the eccrine sweat glands, usually in most animals, are used for grip,
Oh,
or
okay.
are believed to be used for grip. They're most densely located on palms of hands and feet. As I said, on dogs, they're pretty much only found on the pads of their
Sure.
feet. So they make them a little bit, less slippery and more easy to grip surfaces. And then apocrine sweat glands, which produce the sweat that becomes more smelly, in most animals believed to be used for pheromones.
Okay.
But obviously, different animals use them for different purposes. So, as Hobodemon pointed out, humans are pretty much completely unique in that we use the eccrine sweat glands for thermoregulation. So, we sweat, the sweat evaporates, and that allows us to cool off and stay cool.
Okay.
We are not, however, the only animals who use sweat for thermoregulation. Some other apes do it, and horses are well known for doing it. But all of the other animals that use sweat for thermoregulation are using the apocrine sweat glands,
Interesting.
which is quite interesting. So, even though technically we're not the only ones who sweat to cool off, we do so in a completely unique manner, which is quite interesting. I also saw a fairly recent study that, so just in the abstract, they mentioned that I guess the assumption has been that the apocrine sweat glands were kind of like the default ones, and then the
Okay.
eccrine sweat glands kind of evolved by specializing. But they've had this new study that suggested that they've kind of evolved side by side for a much longer time. So they've kind of always been two separate things.
Okay.
So, which makes it even more interesting that we use the wrong
Right.
one for
Yeah.
thermoregulation. So, anyway, all of that I thought was very interesting, but I wanted to find out what the connection between that and the milk glands was. And it turns out that the whole evolution of mammary glands is still very much debated and being researched and stuff.
Okay.
But the mammary glands are essentially specialized apocrine sweat glands. So I guess one of the prevailing theories is that some sweat glands evolved into milk glands.
That's just wild. Like
Yeah,
evolution. Just let's just
yeah,
adapt this thing that is entirely unrelated to be core to like the survival of the
yes.
species.
And also, that's not the only specialized apocrine sweat glands, because the glands in your ears that produce earwax are also
Sweat.
specialized sweat glands.
Yeah.
So
That's
earwax,
pretty.
milk, and a couple other fluids like some of the some of the substances that go into tears are essentially fancy sweat.
That's just crazy.
Yeah, so that was definitely more of a rabbit hole than I expected. I was kind of just looking for a, you know,
Hmm.
tell me more about milk evolving from sweat glands. And I was like, actually, there's like two whole systems here that are all like really
Yeah, just
complex and diverse. And
I wonder if the fact that we used the wrong sweat glands has anything to do with the fact that we're hairless.
I would assume so.
Like it's
Because, yeah, like I said, like the eccrine sweat glands tend to be more common on bare skin, and
Holmes.
the evergreen
Exactly.
sweat
Yeah,
glands
that's what I was
not.
wondering. Yeah.
Um, so I would definitely assume so. But also, maybe I'm making this up, but I think there was also the idea that we lost the fur in order to better thermoregulate through
Yeah.
sweat. So it
Okay.
all just kind of all happened together, I guess.
It's a
I
big,
don't know.
yeah,
This
circle
is this
chicken and
is
egg.
this is beyond what I read and more just me speculating based on my
Yeah.
very in-depth knowledge on the subject, practically nil.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, fun facts for this time, and
Yeah.
yeah, we'll talk to you all later. Unless you want to hear what I have to say about
Worm.
worm.
So, spoilers for Worm coming up. Um, Otherwise, if you want to stick around, great. Otherwise, have a great night, everybody. Thank you for listening.
All right. So now we're going back to worm, which is not nearly as catchy as backed to packed, but whatever.
Wiggling
Um,
to worm, worming into worm.
anyway, this was just a thought I had, really,
Yeah.
because we were talking about the Wyvern drug
Hmm.
and how all of these projects were kind of designed to do something, right? Psi is designed to be, with the neuroplasticity and adaptability and so forth. Helen being designed for this sort of seductive uh,
Yeah.
role that she's going to grow up into. But also, we keep seeing that they each have their own things that they're aiming towards.
Which is
So,
the
sorry,
gist of our discussion question here.
yes, exactly, exactly. So we've seen Sai. Sai is sees himself more as a manipulator and coming up with these schemes and so forth. Helen is becoming more of an actor and putting
Empathy and
putting yeah, and being more empathetic and all these things. And I thought it just occurred to me that this is kind of similar to something that we saw in Worm, because in Worm, when you have the capes, they all have sort of this dual aspect to their powers.
mhm,
You have the aspect that comes from the shard and the aspect that comes from their own psychological state and their trigger event.
yeah.
So the
It's the
sorry, go ahead.
shard. Yeah, there's the shard provides the power, but the context of the power and how it's expressed comes from the person
Hmm.
rather than the power. Like it's the shard
Yeah.
just gives like the general gist of it, and how it
Hmm.
actually expresses is the person.
Yeah. And I think the two most obvious examples of the duality of this are
Mhm.
Taylor herself,
Right.
because her superficial power that comes from her trigger event is her controlling of bugs.
Yeah.
But she has that deeper power that comes from her shard of the sort of multitasking, multi-threaded, super,
Infinitely. Yeah.
yeah, ability to process everything that's going on all at once and act on that. Um, and the other example being Jack Slash, his
Hmm.
superficial power from his trigger
Jack
event
Black. Yeah.
is that sort of stabby stabby thing.
Right.
But his real power that comes from his shard is the sort of communication and cohesion among capes and the ability to understand them and sort
Be in
of
the right place at the right time.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you have that sort of like in the terms of
Duality.
the power and abilities in both of these stories, you have the abilities that are being given to you by the shard or by the academy, and the abilities that are coming from yourself as a reaction to that. But in Worm, it was the given power, the shard power, that was the deeper and more significant one. But in this one, it's more the other way around.
Hmm.
and it's the personal one and the adapting to what they've been given that is the more prominent and more significant.
Right.
And I think in a character driven story like this, I think that's really significant. And I
Absolutely.
thought that was a interesting parallel.
Yeah, thank you.
Which
I
maybe I'm
haven't
reading
really,
more into it than I should, but
I
I
hadn't,
thought it
it
was
hadn't,
interesting.
yeah, it hadn't occurred to me. So I appreciate that you brought it up. And like you mentioned that, and I kind of see it a little bit in the other verse also, in how like practitioner families have their own, like they have these ways that their family has done practice forever, but like individuals kind of, if they can and where they can, bring a little bit of their own personality to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like take a look at Liberty versus America, who are both goblin princesses coming from the Teds, who are not, I guess, goblin practitioners at all, but they choose to be goblin princesses, and they both do it in very different ways, despite
Hmm.
being very closely related. I mean, even more, I guess, more broadly, the way that individual people's sight expresses itself is a reflection of their own being rather than the magic around them.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if that has a dual nature with like the way the I suppose there's like the way the spirits
Yeah,
work
see the
on
world, or
you and the way
yeah,
you work on the
the spirits.
yeah would be a sort of dual thing, which I don't think we've seen much duality in the site, but definitely I think
Hmm.
there is that aspect of it there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good thought. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. And with that, I think
Yep.
we shall call it a night.
Please, I am very tired. I've definitely been lagging about an hour ago.
Sure. This might be our longest episode yet, depending how much you cut out.
Do you think it will be?
Well, we've been recording for nearly 3 hours.
Have we not done? Well, I guess with guests we have, but not just the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had some longer ones with guests. I mean, the one with Jenny with where we did it
Yeah,
over 2 days was, I think, like 5 hours long if we counted both of them
yeah.
together.
Even Malia, the one with Malia was super long.
Yeah. Super fun too.
Oh, I really
Absolutely.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this might be our longest, just the two of us. But
Hmm.
a lot of that was waiting for the baby to
Sam.
settle down. So we
He's
shall
like
see.
shifting,
We
and
shall see.
I hear him shifting and moving, so I hope he's asleep, but we'll
Yeah.
see.